You misunderstand, buyer. I didn't purchase you. I rescued you. The air in the Nexus orbital slaver market hung thick with the stench of desperation and exotic pheromones. A cacophony of guttural barks, chirping sales pitches, and the metallic clang of restraints echoed through the vast, dimly lit hall. Beings of every conceivable form were displayed on raised platforms, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, resignation, and simmering rage. Insectoids with iridescent carapaces, hulking ursinoids with muzzled snouts, and slender, blue-skinned humanoids with vacant stares were paraded before potential buyers. Gary Williams, clad in the garish silks of a successful interstellar trader, surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. He paused before a cage containing a pair of whimpering Grolak pups, feigning interest as he ran a gloved hand along the bars. These specimens, their breeding records are satisfactory. He rasped in passable Grolak Common, his translator implant smoothing the rough edges of the language. He haggled mercilessly, feigning disappointment at the pup's lackluster lineage, all the while his stomach churned at the sight of their misery. Then the auctioneer's voice boomed, silencing the market's usual din. Presenting for sale, a specimen of exceptional value. A draconis female, captured during the recent border skirmishes. Observe her regal bearing, her strength, her docility. All eyes turned to the center platform. Astra, a draconis princess, stood tall despite the energy-dampening field that suppressed her formidable strength. Her scaled hide gleamed like polished obsidian in the artificial light, and her reptilian eyes, the color of molten gold, burned with a defiant fire. Shackles of shimmering energy bound her wrists and ankles, but they could not contain the regal bearing that radiated from her. The auction began, bids escalating rapidly. Gary watched, his face hardened as the price soared. Wealthy nobles from decadent empires, ruthless corporate magnates, and shadowy underworld figures all vied for possession of the draconis princess. Finally, with a calculated raise of his datapad, Gary placed the winning bid. The auctioneer, a greasy-skinned Grathian with too many teeth, grinned. Sold, to the esteemed Tor Valerius of the Corellian Trade Combine. Gary approached Astra, his face an impassive mask. The Grathian overseer shoved her toward him, the energy shackles humming as she moved. He led her away from the platform into a dimly lit alcove. Once they were alone, he deactivated the energy dampeners and turned to face her, his voice low and earnest. You misunderstand, buyer. I didn't purchase you. I rescued you. Astra's golden eyes narrowed, her scaled brow furrowed in suspicion. Why me? She hissed, her voice a low, guttural rumble. What do you want? Gary sighed, running a hand through his neatly coiffed hair, disrupting his Tor Valerius persona. I'm no slaver, he said, his voice regaining its natural, earth-born cadence. I've seen enough of this. This galactic rot. I can't stand by and watch another being sold into bondage. Flashback. A younger Gary, working as a mid-level trade compliance officer, witnesses the brutal exploitation of indigenous populations on a newly discovered planet. He reports the abuses to his superiors, only to be met with indifference and thinly veiled threats. The experience leaves him disillusioned, prompting him to leave his comfortable life and dedicate himself to helping those who can't help themselves. End flashback. Slavery was a festering wound on the galactic community, tolerated by many, profited from by more. But there were those, a minority, who fought against it, often in the shadows, risking everything to free the enslaved. Gary was one of them. The Grathian overseer, watching from a distance, frowned as he saw Gary speaking privately with the draconis female. Traders rarely engaged their property in conversation. Something was amiss. Astra regarded Gary with a mixture of suspicion and a flicker of something akin to hope. I am Astra, she said, her voice regaining some of its regal authority. Princess of the House of Valerius of the Draconis royal line. I was captured during the Battle of Cathar and sold. The Grathian's eyes widened, a draconis princess. He had to get her back. Her family would pay a king's ransom for her return. He barked an order to his guards. Seize them. The human misrepresented himself. He's not who he claims to be. Gary cursed under his breath. He had been expecting something like this. He grabbed Astra's hand. We have to go. Now. They sprinted through the crowded market, Gary using his knowledge of the station's ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels to evade the pursuing slavers. He fired a stun blast at an approaching guard, sending him sprawling. Astra, despite her weakened state, delivered a swift kick to the jaw of another, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. They reached Gary's ship, a sleek freighter disguised as a mundane cargo hauler. The ramp hissed open, and they scrambled inside, Gary barking orders to the ship's AI. Launch sequence. Get us out of here. The ship roared to life, tearing away from the docking bay just as the slavers opened fire. Energy blasts scorched the hull, sending tremors through the vessel. As they cleared the station, Gary saw a swarm of slaver ships give chase. They've placed a bounty on our heads, he muttered, his fingers flying across the navigation console. Time to disappear. He programmed a course for a remote system on the fringes of explored space, a place where slavers rarely dared to venture. The klaxons blared, strobing red light painting the cockpit in frantic pulses. The ship shuddered violently as Gary wrestled with the controls, weaving through a dense field of asteroids. They're gaining, Gary, Astra said, her voice tight with urgency. The draconis princess, despite her captivity, possessed a regal composure that bordered on unnerving. I see them, Gary grunted, his fingers tightening as he gripped the flight stick. Damn slavers are persistent. Try rotating the inertial dampeners by 7 degrees and shifting power to the ventral thrusters, Astra suggested, her reptilian eyes narrowed in concentration. It will allow for a tighter turn around that cluster. Gary, surprised by her knowledge, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed her instructions. The ship responded instantly, executing a sharp turn that sent them skimming past a massive asteroid, narrowly avoiding a collision. The pursuing ships, caught off guard, were forced to break formation. Impressive, Gary admitted, a grin flashing across his face. Where did you learn to fly like that? Draconis piloting techniques are efficient, she replied curtly, her gaze fixed on the pursuing vessels. Focus on evading them, they will not give up easily. Gary toggled a switch on the console, time for a little payback. He initiated the electronic countermeasures, sending a burst of scrambled signals toward the lead slaver ship. The vessel sputtered, its engines momentarily faltering before recovering. That bought us some time, Gary said, breathing heavily. But not much. Astra watched him, her expression unreadable. You possess unusual abilities for a trader, human. Gary shrugged. Necessity is a great teacher. I've learned a few things over the years. He didn't elaborate, leaving Astra to fill in the gaps with her own assumptions. We need to discuss our resources, Gary said, his voice turning serious. I have a hidden cache of supplies, enough for a few weeks. I also know of a neutral trading outpost in the Kepler 186F system. It's a lawless place, but we might be able to lose them there. Astra's scaled brow furrowed. A trading outpost in Kepler 186F. That area is rife with pirates and, worse, what makes you think you can navigate such a dangerous place, and why would you risk yourself for a slave? Her tone was tinged with suspicion. I have my reasons, Gary replied, his gaze meeting hers. And I know the risks, but it's our best chance. He paused. You can trust me, Astra, for now. Astra studied him for a long moment, her eyes piercing. Very well, she conceded. For now, I will trust your judgment. Hours later, as the ship cruised through hyperspace, Astra sat across from Gary, the dim light of the cockpit casting long shadows across her face. Tell me about your capture, Gary prompted gently. It might help to process what happened. Astra hesitated, her body tense. I was transporting supplies to a remote outpost when my ship was ambushed. The slavers overwhelmed my crew. I was subdued and sold. She omitted the details of her royal status and the political machinations that led to her capture, carefully constructing a narrative that was partially true but ultimately incomplete. I was a tactician in the Draconis military, she added, a flicker of pride in her voice. Before, Gary listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He noticed the inconsistencies in her story, the subtle omissions and deflections, but he didn't press her. He sensed that she wasn't ready to reveal the full truth, and he respected her privacy. But he also remained observant, knowing that her secrets could hold the key to their survival. Days later, they arrived at the trading outpost, a sprawling, chaotic hub of smugglers, mercenaries, and other denizens of the galactic underworld. The air was thick with the smells of exotic spices, engine grease, and desperation. Gary, blending seamlessly into the crowd, bartered for information about the slavers' movements and potential safe routes. He spoke in a dozen different alien languages, his words quick and precise. As they were leaving a dimly lit cantina, a group of heavily armed mercenaries blocked their path. Well, the leader sneered, his eyes fixed on Astra. Look what we have here, the Draconis princess. There's a hefty bounty on your head, your highness. Astra's hand instinctively went to the hilt of a non-existent sword. I am no one's prize, she hissed, her eyes blazing with defiance. The mercenaries lunged and chaos erupted. Gary, despite his lack of formal combat training, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He used his knowledge of the environment to his advantage, tripping opponents, throwing improvised weapons, and generally making himself a difficult target. Astra, despite her weakened state, moved with deadly precision, disarming and incapacitating her attackers with swift, brutal strikes. During the fight, one of the mercenaries managed to land a blow on Gary, sending him sprawling to the ground. Astra, seeing him fall, roared with fury and dispatched the remaining attackers with ruthless efficiency. She rushed to Gary's side, her expression etched with concern. "Human, are you injured?" Gary winced, clutching his side. "Just a scratch," he lied, though the pain was searing. Astra, ignoring his protests, tore a strip of cloth from her tunic and began to tend to his wound. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her movements precise and efficient. As she worked, she murmured a few words in Draconis, a soft, melodic phrase that Gary didn't understand. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice strained. Astra looked up, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. As they rested in a secluded corner of the outpost, nursing their wounds, a contact Gary had made earlier approached them. "I heard some rumors," the contact whispered, his eyes darting nervously. "There's a Draconis resistance movement operating in the Zeta Reticuli system. They're fighting against the slavers and the corrupt officials who support them. Might be a safe haven for you. And her." Gary exchanged a look with Astra. The Zeta Reticuli system was a long shot, a dangerous gamble, but it was also their best option for long-term safety and a potential path to Astra reclaiming her life. "What do you think?" Gary asked, his gaze searching hers. Astra met his eyes, her expression resolute. "We go," she said, her voice firm. "We find this resistance." The navigation console hummed as Gary plotted a course for the Cathos system, a cluster of dying stars rumored to harbor the remnants of the Draconis resistance. Nebulae swirled on the viewport, painted with hues of violet and crimson. "Cathos is not a friendly place," Astra said, her voice a low rumble. "It is where Draconis go to die or to hide." Gary tapped a sequence into the ship's computer, rerouting their transponder signal. "Hoping to keep those slavers off our tail. I managed to snag a fake code from a reliable source, should buy us some time." Astra watched him, her reptilian eyes narrowed in thought. "You are skilled at dealing with such unsavory individuals, Gary Williams. It is unexpected." He chuckled, a wry sound. "Let's just say I've had my share of experience in the galaxy's underbelly. A man does what he has to survive." The words hung in the air, hinting at a past he wasn't ready to fully reveal. Suddenly, a blip flared on the radar. "Unidentified vessel approaching," Gary announced, his fingers dancing across the controls. A sleek fighter, its hull scarred with battle damage, appeared on the viewport. It was Draconis. "This is Talon 7, Draconis Resistance," a gravelly voice crackled over the comms. "Identify yourselves." The voice dripped with suspicion. "This is the Wandering Star, a trading vessel," Gary replied, forcing a casual tone. "We're looking for assistance." A human in Draconis space. The pilot's skepticism was palpable. "What business could you possibly have with us?" "I have a passenger," Gary said, glancing at Astra, "who needs your help." A tense silence followed. "Very well, human, I will guide you. But be warned, we are not welcoming company. Follow my lead and keep your weapons cold." The fighter peeled off, leading them towards a desolate moon orbiting a gas giant. The surface was a patchwork of craters and metallic structures, barely visible in the perpetual twilight. As they landed near a cluster of ramshackle buildings, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was a Draconis warrior, tall and imposing, with scales the color of burnished bronze. His eyes, hard and unforgiving, scanned them with open hostility. "I am Varkas," he growled, his voice like grinding stone, "leader of this resistance, and you are—" He fixed his gaze on Astra. "A Draconis found in a slaver's market. Explain yourself." Astra stood tall, her chin raised. "I am Astra of the royal line. I was betrayed and captured, but I am here to reclaim what is mine." Varkas scoffed. "Words are cheap, slave. Tell me something only a Draconis would know, something that proves your lineage." Astra paused, then spoke a series of complex tactical maneuvers, referencing specific battles and strategies. These tactics were developed by the Iron Legion during the Siege of Krelos. Only a commander would know them. Varkas's expression softened, but only slightly. "Impressive, but we are not in a position to trust easily. As you can see," he swept his arm across the dilapidated base, "we are severely under-equipped, desperate even." Gary stepped forward. "I might be able to help with that. I have contacts, resources. I could acquire weapons, supplies." Varkas's eyes narrowed. "At what cost, human?" "A favor," Gary said, his gaze unwavering. "A transport run, some illicit goods need to be moved, nothing dangerous, I assure you." Varkas considered this, his brow furrowed. "We are fighting for our survival. We cannot afford to be squeamish." Gary hesitated. Smuggling was against everything he stood for. But looking at Astra, at the desperate faces of the resistance fighters, he knew he had no choice. Astra placed a hand on his arm. "The ends justify the means, Gary. We have no other options." Her voice was firm, resolute. Gary sighed, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. "All right, I'll do it." He looked at Varkas. "Tell me what needs to be moved and where." Later, as Gary prepped the Wandering Star for the run, Astra found him in the cargo hold, checking the seals on several large crates. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and lubricant. "Thank you, Gary," she said softly, "for doing this, for believing in me." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I believe in you, Astra. More than you know." He reached out, gently cupping her scaled cheek. "And I'm starting to feel something for you, something I haven't felt in a long time." Astra leaned into his touch, her reptilian eyes softening. "And I for you, Gary Williams, but our path is fraught with danger. Do not let your feelings cloud your judgment." Their moment was interrupted by a klaxon blaring through the ship. "Incoming!" Gary yelled, rushing to the cockpit. "Slaver patrol, they're jamming our comms." Laser fire ripped through the cargo hold as the Wandering Star lurched violently. Gary wrestled with the controls, dodging the relentless barrage. "They knew we were coming," Astra shouted, firing back with a plasma rifle. "Someone betrayed us," Gary cursed, weaving through the asteroid field. "It had to be someone who knew about the run, someone here at the base." Astra's face paled. "The information I shared. Only a few knew those tactics." She turned to Gary, her voice filled with dread. I may have endangered you and the resistance." Despite the damage, Gary managed to shake off the slavers and limp back to the base. As he inspected the damage, he discovered something far more disturbing. The ship's engine components had been deliberately sabotaged. The fuel lines were cut almost perfectly, and the power couplings were severed. "Someone didn't just want us caught," Gary said, his voice grim. "They wanted us dead." They returned to the base, the revelation of treachery hanging heavy in the air, sowing suspicion and discord among the already desperate resistance members. The metallic clang of the blast door's sealing shut echoed through the resistance base, a jarring punctuation mark on the chaos that had erupted only moments before. Varkas, his scaled face a mask of fury, barked orders in guttural Draconis. "Lockdown, no one is to be trusted. Find the traitor." Gary stepped forward, his voice calm amidst the rising tide of panic. "Varkas, with respect, immediate action is paramount, but indiscriminate accusations won't help. I request permission to investigate the sabotage. My skills are suited to uncovering the truth." Varkas's reptilian eyes narrowed, regarding Gary with suspicion. A human investigating a Draconis betrayal? Preposterous. Astra placed a hand on Varkas's arm, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Varkas, Gary has proven his loyalty. He sees patterns others miss. Trust him. Let him investigate." She met Gary's gaze, a silent reassurance passing between them. "We need answers, and we need them quickly." Varkas, visibly struggling with his reservations, finally relented. "Very well, but he answers to me, and if he uncovers nothing..." He let the threat hang in the air. Gary nodded, unfazed. "Understood. I'll begin by interviewing those who had access to the ship and the mission parameters." He turned to Astra. "Perhaps you could guide me. Your insights into the social dynamics here would be invaluable." For the next several hours, Gary and Astra moved through the base, a network of interconnected tunnels carved into the rock face. Gary, with his datapad and keen observation skills, interviewed members of the resistance. He focused on those who had direct access to the sabotaged ship and the secure communication channels used to transmit Astra's plans. Astra, with her regal bearing and intimate knowledge of Draconis culture, helped him navigate the subtle nuances of each interaction, identifying potential signs of deception or hidden agendas. "Trella seems nervous," Astra murmured, after Gary concluded an interview with a wiry Draconis female who specialized in weapons modifications. More so than the others, she avoided eye contact and her tail twitched constantly, a sign of anxiety. Gary made a note on his datapad. "Her alibi is also a little shaky. She claims she was calibrating weapon systems all night, but 2 other technicians say they didn't see her." Days passed, and Gary began to find discrepancies in the alibis of several resistance members, but Trella's story was the most concerning. He decided to focus his attention on her. "Astra, can you check if Trella has had any unusual communications lately? Specifically, any encrypted messages sent off-world?" Astra accessed the Resistance's communication logs, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. After a moment, her expression darkened. "She has. Several encrypted messages sent to a known slaver operative on Nar Shaddaa. The messages are heavily coded, but the timing coincides with the sabotage." Gary's eyes narrowed. "Let's see if we can crack those codes." He spent the next few hours hunched over his datapad, running complex algorithms to decipher the encrypted messages. Finally, the code broke, revealing the damning truth. "She was promised a large sum of money to sabotage the mission and deliver you back to the slavers," Gary said grimly, reading the decoded message aloud. "They wanted to make an example of you to discourage any other Draconis from resisting their control." Together, Gary and Astra confronted Trella in her workshop, the air thick with tension. "We know what you did, Trella," Astra said, her voice cold with betrayal. "We have the evidence. The encrypted messages, the slaver operative." Trella's scales paled, but she stubbornly maintained her innocence. I don't know what you're talking about. I was framed. Those messages, they must have been fabricated. Varkas, who had accompanied them, exploded in fury. Traitor, you dare lie to my face. The punishment for treason is death. He drew his energy blade, the humming weapon casting an eerie glow in the confined space. Gary stepped forward, placing a hand on Varkas's arm. Hold on, Varkas. Something doesn't feel right. He looked at Trella, noticing the fear in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her scaled hands. Trella, are you being threatened? Were you forced to do this? Trella remained silent, her gaze darting nervously between Varkas and Astra. Gary turned to Astra. I think she's being blackmailed or coerced. Someone has something on her. We need to find out who's pulling the strings. He looked back at Varkas. Killing her won't solve anything. It'll just silence her. I propose we use her as bait, lure out the slaver operative and expose the larger conspiracy. Varkas looked skeptical. Trust a traitor. You're insane, human. Astra hesitated, her mind warring between her desire for justice and her growing trust in Gary's judgment. It's risky, but it might be our only chance to uncover the truth. Very well, Gary. We'll do it your way, but I'm watching her. The plan was set in motion. Trella, under close guard, sent a message to the slaver operative, informing them that Astra would be at a specific location on the outskirts of the base, vulnerable and unprotected. Gary, Astra, and Varkas lay in wait, concealed in the shadows, their weapons charged and ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the rocky landscape, a transport ship landed nearby. A figure emerged, clad in dark armor, their face obscured by a helmet. Now, Gary hissed, and the trap was sprung. A firefight erupted, energy bolts searing the air as Gary, Astra, and Varkas engaged the slaver operative and their accompanying mercenaries. Gary, relying on his quick reflexes and tactical thinking, provided covering fire while Astra and Varkas moved in for the kill. As the battle raged, Gary managed to disarm the slaver operative, knocking their helmet off to reveal their identity. A high-ranking member of the Draconis government, Counselor Saurian, his face contorted with rage. "You fools!" Saurian roared. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. The slavers are our allies. They keep the weak in line." Suddenly, a shot rang out, striking Saurian in the chest. Trella, who had been standing behind Gary, lowered her smoking weapon. I couldn't let him hurt Astra anymore," she gasped, clutching her side. A crimson stain spread across her armor. Varkas rushed to Trella's side, his expression softening with remorse. "Trella, why?" Trella smiled weakly. I had to redeem myself." Astra knelt beside Trella, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You saved us, Trella. You proved your loyalty." Varkas looked at Astra, shame etched on his face. I was wrong about you, Astra, about Gary. I judged you too harshly." With his dying breath, Trella looked at Astra, telling her, "You must trust Gary. He will help save our species." Gary reached out and took Astra's hand, and she squeezed it tightly. Around them, the echoes of battle faded, replaced by a heavy silence. The bodies of the mercenaries lay scattered across the ground, a grim reminder of the price of freedom. Astra looked at Gary, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and persistence. "This goes deeper than we thought, Gary. The corruption. It runs through the very heart of our government." Gary squeezed her hand in return, his gaze unwavering. "Then we'll rip it out together." Astra trembled, the violet scales along her spine barely perceptible shimmers under the dim light of the ship. Trella gone, and the Draconis government complicit. I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Who can I even trust?" Gary reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before gently resting there. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in her bones. "You can trust me, Astra. I promise you that. We'll figure this out together. We'll find the truth, no matter how deep it's buried, but it's going to be dangerous, more dangerous than we thought." Astra pulled away slightly, her reptilian eyes narrowing. How did you decode Trella's messages? The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. That was a Draconis encryption key, one only accessible to those within the Royal Guard. Suspicion laced her voice, a bitter tang of betrayal. Gary's brow furrowed. I found the decryption key in a database of leaked Draconis tech sold on the black market. He watched her carefully, gauging her reaction. It's a common enough practice in the galaxy, but the database had sections only available to the highest bidder. I paid for the highest tier, knowing it might contain information vital to helping you. Astra recoiled as if struck. That such a thing even exists. That our technology, secrets of the Royal Guard, are being sold like common trinkets. Her voice trailed off, choked with disbelief and disgust. The corruption ran deeper than she could have imagined. Varkas stepped forward, his expression grim. Princess, I swear on my honor I will help you expose this corruption. The people of Draconis deserve better. Gary placed a hand on Astra's arm, his gaze firm. Astra, be careful. We don't know if we can trust him. He could be involved, or worse, a plant. Astra rounded on Gary, her eyes flashing. Varkas is loyal. He served my father for decades. I trust him implicitly. Gary held up his hands, a gesture of appeasement. I respect your decision, Astra, but we need to be cautious. Too much is at stake. He turned away, accessing the console. I'll focus on analyzing the messages Trella sent. There has to be something in there, some clue about what this government official is planning. Hours blurred into a tense silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the tap-tap-tap of Gary's fingers on the console. Finally, he straightened up, his face etched with a mixture of excitement and concern. I found something. Trella kept mentioning a mind pearl in her messages. It's encrypted within the messages, but I was able to piece together enough to realize what it is. A mind pearl? Astra asked, her tone curious. It's Draconis tech, Gary explained. It allows the user to access and manipulate memories. Trella was researching mind pearl tech. He paused, and I think it's the key to this whole conspiracy. How so? Varkas asked, stepping closer. Mind pearl tech is vulnerable to manipulation, Gary said, his fingers flying across the console. From what I can gather, the security protocols are practically non-existent. It's like hacking a mainframe that's still running on stone knives and bare skins. Astra's eyes widened. If someone could manipulate the mind pearl, they could control the memories of others, influence their decisions. Exactly, Gary confirmed. And according to Trella's notes, Counselor Saurian has been overseeing mind pearl research and development for the last several cycles. Astra's eyes hardened. Saurian, he was always ambitious. She turned to Varkas. Can you confirm this, Varkas? Does Saurian oversee the mind pearl project? Varkas nodded grimly. Yes, Princess, it is true. He has poured vast resources into its development, but I never suspected. I have a plan, Gary interrupted, his voice low and urgent. We need to infiltrate Saurian's research facility, gather evidence of this mind pearl manipulation. It's the only way to expose him. Astra hesitated, her gaze hardening again. It's too dangerous, Gary. I can't ask you to do that. Especially not after what happened to Trella. I feel responsible. Gary stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. This isn't about Trella, Astra. This is about your people, about justice, and I'm willing to take the risk. Besides, he added with a wry smile, who else is going to crack their security systems? Astra searched his face, her expression conflicted. Finally, she nodded. All right. We do it. But you stay close to me, Gary. I won't lose anyone else. Under the cover of darkness, Gary, Astra, Varkas, and a small team approached Saurian's research facility. The structure loomed against the night sky, a monolith of polished obsidian and pulsating energy conduits. Gary worked swiftly, bypassing the laser grids and pressure sensors with practiced ease. His fingers danced across his datapad, lines of code scrolling across the screen. Inside, the facility hummed with activity. Scientists in sterile white suits scurried between laboratories, their faces illuminated by the glow of holographic displays. As Gary bypassed a security checkpoint, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Astra, wait. He pulled her back into the shadows. Look at this. He pointed to a group of Draconis soldiers standing guard, their eyes glazed over, their movements robotic. They've already been mind-wiped, Saurian's tightening his grip. They moved deeper into the facility, navigating the labyrinthine corridors. Suddenly, alarms blared, bathing the facility in harsh red light. "We've been compromised," Varkas shouted. "Everyone move." A firefight erupted, energy weapons blazing, illuminating the chaos. Gary and Astra became separated from their team, forced to flee down a narrow corridor. They burst into a vast chamber, dominated by a swirling vortex of energy. And there, at the center of it all, stood Saurian himself, his eyes gleaming with manic intensity. "So the princess has arrived," Saurian sneered, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "I was wondering when you'd show your face." "Saurian, what is the meaning of this?" Astra demanded, her voice ringing with authority. "What are you doing with the Mind Pearl?" Saurian laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "I am creating a new Draconis order, princess. One free from the weakness and corruption that plagued your father's reign. With the Mind Pearl, I can shape the minds of our leaders, ensure their loyalty, and eliminate anyone who opposes me." He gestured towards Astra. "And now, princess, it is your turn. You will be the first to embrace this new order." Saurian raised his hand and the energy vortex intensified, tendrils of light reaching out towards Astra. Gary lunged forward, firing his disruptor pistol. The shot went wide, but the sudden burst of energy disrupted the Mind Pearl's process, causing Saurian to cry out in pain as the vortex flickered and spat. "Seize them!" Saurian screamed, clutching his head. In the ensuing chaos, Gary grabbed Astra's hand, pulling her towards an emergency exit. They sprinted through the corridors, energy blasts whizzing past their heads. They finally reached the exit, bursting out into the night. As they stumbled away from the facility, they heard the blare of sirens and the roar of approaching vehicles. Gary checked his datapad. "We've been framed," he said grimly. "Saurians declared us fugitives, wanted for sabotaging the Mind Pearl research." The alarms blared, echoing through the sterile corridors as Gary dragged Astra along, his grip firm but gentle on her arm. Draconis security forces wouldn't be far behind. He risked a glance back, the flashing red lights painted grotesque shadows on the walls. "Faster," he urged, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They plunged into a turbolift, Gary slamming his hand against the control panel. The doors hissed shut just as two Draconis guards rounded the corner, their reptilian eyes narrowed in fury. The lift lurched downwards. "Where are we going?" Astra asked, her voice tight with fear. "Down," Gary replied grimly. "Way down, the lower levels. It's a maze down there. Criminals and outcasts know how to hide." The turbolift shuddered to a halt. The doors opened onto a scene that was a stark contrast to the pristine laboratory above. Grime coated the walls, flickering neon signs cast long, distorted shadows, and the air hung thick with the smell of decay and desperation. A motley collection of beings, hulking aliens with cybernetic implants, shadowy figures cloaked in rags, and twitching addicts shuffled through the dimly lit corridors. Astra recoiled slightly, her regal bearing momentarily faltering. "This place, it's wretched. It's also hidden," Gary countered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "And right now, hidden is good." "We need help," Astra insisted, pulling out a small comm device. "I have to contact Varkas." Gary frowned. "Varkas, are you sure that's wise? We don't know who we can trust." "I trust Varkas," Astra said firmly. "He's been a friend of my family for years. He'll know where to go." She activated the comm. A moment later, a gruff voice crackled through the device. "Astra." "By the scales, what's happened? I heard the alarms." "We escaped Saurian's lab," Astra explained quickly. "We need your help. Can you meet us?" "Of course, anything. Where are you?" Astra gave him their location. Hurry, Varkas, they'll be looking for us. I'm on my way, Varkas replied, his voice filled with concern. The comm went silent. Gary watched Astra, his expression troubled. He arrived quickly. Astra shrugged. He's a resourceful man. Or, Gary countered, his voice low, he already knew something was going on. Think about it, how could he get here so fast? Astra frowned but shook her head. Don't be ridiculous, Gary. Varkas is loyal. I trust him implicitly. A heavily modified transport ship, its engines sputtering and coughing, landed nearby. Varkas emerged, his scaled face etched with worry. Astra, thank the ancestors you're safe. He rushed towards her, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. Varkas, it's good to see you, Astra said, relief evident in her voice. Varkas turned to Gary, his gaze scrutinizing. And you must be the human. Astra told me you helped her. I did what anyone with a conscience would do, Gary replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. We must leave immediately, Varkas urged. I have a ship waiting. It will take us to a hidden rebel base outside the city. They can offer us protection. As they boarded the ship, Gary couldn't shake his unease. Varkas's question seemed pointed. What exactly did you discover in Saurian's lab? He asked Astra, his eyes fixed on her. What are these mind pearls capable of? They can unlock memories, knowledge, Astra answered, distracted. But they're being used to control our people. Control them how? Varkas pressed, a strange intensity in his voice. What are the specifics? Gary watched them closely. Varkas seemed less concerned with Astra's safety and more interested in the details of their discovery. Why do you ask? Gary interjected, his voice sharp. Varkas waved a dismissive hand. Just trying to understand the situation, human. The more we know, the better we can fight Saurian. Gary noticed the subtle twitch in Varkas's eye, the way his hand tightened on the controls. He was hiding something. Gary filed away the inconsistencies. Varkas was not as concerned about their safety as he claimed. The ship touched down in a secluded canyon, concealed by holographic camouflage. A small contingent of Draconis warriors emerged, weapons drawn. They lowered their weapons as they recognized Varkas. Welcome to our sanctuary, Varkas announced, gesturing towards a fortified entrance built into the canyon wall. The rebel base was far more sophisticated than Gary had anticipated. It was well-equipped, organized, and bustling with activity. Draconis soldiers drilled in formation, technicians tinkered with advanced weaponry, and strategists huddled over holographic displays. Astra led Gary to a command center where a tall, imposing Draconis warrior stood studying a tactical map. Her scales were a deep emerald green and her eyes burned with fierce willpower. Lyra, Astra said, this is Gary, the human who helped me escape. Gary, this is Lyra, the leader of the rebellion. Lyra turned, her gaze assessing. Human, I've heard interesting things. We are grateful for any assistance, Astra said, but what do you know of Saurian's operation? We know he is manipulating our people with these mind pearls, Lyra said grimly. Stealing their memories, rewriting their minds. We are trying to find a way to stop him. Gary stepped forward. I might be able to help with that. I've analyzed the mind pearls technology. I know its vulnerabilities. He explained his findings, detailing how the device could be disrupted, how its signal could be blocked. Lyra listened intently, her eyes widening with each revelation. This is remarkable. Your knowledge could be invaluable. Unseen by Gary and Astra, Varkas slipped away, activating a hidden comm device. They are here, he whispered into the device. At the rebel base, the human knows about the mind pearl's vulnerabilities. A cold, reptilian voice crackled back. Excellent. Eliminate them, all of them. Back in the command center, Lyra turned to Gary, a plan forming in her eyes. We can use your knowledge to disrupt Saurian's network. It involves infiltrating another facility, deeper within his control. Gary nodded. I'm in, tell me what you need me to do. You would risk your life for us, Lyra asked, surprised. I didn't drag her this far to back out now, Gary said, glancing at Astra. But I'm not going without her. She knows more about this than anyone. Lyra raised an eyebrow, surprised. That may be unwise, human. This is a dangerous mission. Astra hesitated, torn. She wanted to help her people, but she also feared for Gary's safety. She was beginning to feel something for him, something she hadn't expected. "It's too dangerous, Gary," she said softly. Gary took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know it's dangerous, Astra, but you're not helpless. You're strong, you're intelligent, and you know what's at stake. We can do this together." Varkas, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "Astra, perhaps it would be best if you stayed here. This mission is too perilous for you." Astra looked at Varkas, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Something about his eagerness to keep her out of the mission didn't feel right, but she didn't voice her concerns, not yet. The holographic display shimmered in the dimly lit Rebel briefing room, showcasing the stark, angular architecture of the Saurian research facility. Lyra, her voice tight with controlled fury, pointed to a series of interconnected chambers. "This is where Saurian's pet scientists are twisting Draconis minds with advanced mind pearl technology. They're perfecting the process of memory extraction and manipulation, creating sleeper agents loyal only to him." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Gary and Astra. "Intel suggests Saurian himself rarely appears here, considering it beneath him." Gary frowned, studying the schematic. "This is detailed, but I see nothing about internal security protocols. No guard placements, no patrol routes, no sensor grids. What about personnel files? Who are we up against?" He turned to Varkas, his voice imbued with skepticism. "Where did this intel originate?" Varkas, his scaled face impassive, waved a dismissive hand. "The information is sufficient. Further investigation would only jeopardize the mission. We know what they're doing, and that's what matters. Delay is Saurian's ally." Later, huddled in a secluded corner of the base, Gary voiced his growing unease to Astra. "Something doesn't feel right. Varkas is pushing this too hard, too fast, and the intel, it's too clean, almost like he wants us to go in blind." He tapped the holographic schematic. "He claims he doesn't know much about the facility's security, but how can he be so sure Saurian is rarely there without knowing more?" Astra, her brow furrowed, initially defended Varkas. "He's been loyal to the rebellion for decades, Gary. He's risked everything for our people." But a flicker of doubt danced in her reptilian eyes. "Still, I admit I feel uneasy too. He's more intense than usual." They returned to the holographic display, their fingers tracing the labyrinthine corridors of the facility. Gary, his human ingenuity sparking, began to identify potential vulnerabilities. These ventilation shafts, large enough to move through, and the power grid. A single point of entry. If we can overload the system, we can create a diversion. "The mind pearls," Astra murmured, her voice tinged with concern. "They link directly to the subject's neural pathways. Even a temporary disruption could cause lasting damage." "Which is why," Gary said, a glint in his eye, "we're not going to damage them, we're going to scramble them." He began sketching schematics on a nearby datapad. "I can design a device to emit a specific frequency that will disrupt the mind pearl signals within the facility, rendering them temporarily ineffective. It will give the rebels a window of opportunity to extract the prisoners." He paused. "I'll call it a disruptor." Torn between her trust in Varkas and her growing belief in Gary's abilities, Astra sought out Varkas in his private quarters. "Gary has developed a plan to disrupt the mind pearl signals," she explained, laying out Gary's schematics on Varkas's desk. "He calls it a disruptor. What do you think?" Varkas studied the schematics, his expression unreadable. He subtly suggested modifications, ostensibly to improve the device's efficiency, but which would, in reality, weaken its effectiveness, shortening the window of disruption. "These alterations will ensure the device doesn't overload the system," he said smoothly. "A simple tweak to the frequency modulator, and perhaps a reduction in power output for stability." Gary, reviewing the modified schematics later, immediately recognized the attempted sabotage. "He's deliberately trying to cripple the device," he growled, his fists clenching. He sought out Varkas, confronting him in the main hall of the rebel base, his voice ringing with accusation. "You're working for Saurian, aren't you?" Varkas feigned outrage, his scales flushing a dark crimson. "How dare you? I have dedicated my life to this rebellion. You, a mere human, come here and accuse me of treason. You're undermining everything we're trying to achieve." He turned to Astra, his voice dripping with wounded sincerity. "Can you believe this, Astra? He's trying to poison our minds against each other." Astra stood frozen, caught in the crossfire, unsure who to believe. "Enough," she commanded, her voice echoing through the hall. "I want proof. Both of you, explain yourselves. Now." Gary, his mind racing, quickly set up a holographic simulation of the research facility, inputting the original disruptor schematics and then Varkas's modified version. The simulation clearly demonstrated the disruptor's effectiveness in its original form, scrambling the mind pearl signals and creating a wide window of opportunity. But with Varkas's modifications, the signals were only briefly disrupted, leaving the prisoners vulnerable. He then brought up schematics of the facility's power grid, revealing that Varkas knew the exact location of the backup generators, information he claimed he didn't have access to. The rebels gasped, realizing the extent of Varkas's betrayal. Varkas, exposed, lunged for the exit, but was quickly apprehended by Lyra and several other rebels. They dragged him away, his protests echoing through the base. Lyra, her face grim, began questioning Varkas, demanding to know the extent of Saurian's influence within the rebellion, who he was working with, and what the larger plan was. "Who else is compromised, Varkas? How deep does Saurian's rot spread?" Astra, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow, confronted Varkas. "Why, Varkas? Why betray our people? Why betray everything we believe in?" Varkas, his eyes filled with a desperate hunger, snarled, "Saurian promised me power, influence, a place in the new Draconis regime. The royal family is weak, Astra, corrupted. I deserve to rule, not them. Saurian saw my potential where you and the others only saw a loyal soldier." Lyra, her face hardening, issued orders to secure Varkas. "He's going to tell us everything, but this changes nothing. The mission still goes ahead." She turned to Gary, her expression softening slightly. "We knew Varkas was likely a traitor, Gary. We needed to be sure. This entire facility was designed to find that evidence and to draw him out. Your suspicions merely accelerated the process." She paused. "We'll proceed with your original plan." Later, as Gary and Astra prepared for the mission, Astra approached Gary, her eyes filled with regret. I am sorry, Gary. I doubted you. My trust in Varkas blinded me to the truth." Gary gently took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle for a human. "It's human nature to trust those closest to us, Astra. Don't beat yourself up over it. The important thing is that we learned from it. And now," he said, a determined glint in his eye, "we stop Saurian." The transport shuddered subtly as it decelerated, approaching Saurian's research facility. Energy readings spiking. "Gary," Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. "Something's different about their security grid." Gary frowned, his fingers flying across the console. "I'm seeing it too. Looks like they've upgraded their mind pearl dampening field. Standard disruptor won't cut it anymore." He glanced at Astra, her scaled hands clenched into fists. "Give me a few minutes. I can recalibrate the frequency, but it'll be tight." He ripped open a panel on the side of the disruptor rifle, exposing a tangle of wires and circuits. The air filled with the scent of ozone as he rerouted power conduits and adjusted the focusing lens with practiced ease. "New frequency should bypass the upgraded field," he announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "But it's a one-shot deal. If we miss, we're toast." The transport docked with a barely perceptible thud. "Transponder codes accepted," Lyra confirmed. "Docking clamps secured. Let's move." The team moved with practiced efficiency, splitting into smaller groups as they entered the sterile corridors of the facility. Gary and Astra took point, their footsteps echoing softly on the metal floor. "Remember the plan," Gary murmured, his hand resting on the disruptor. "Disable the Mind Pearl amplification system, then rescue the prisoners." Astra nodded, her reptilian eyes scanning the shadows. "The Draconis guards will be patrolling in 6 soldier squads, rotating every 15 cycles. They prioritize perimeter security." As if on cue, the metallic clang of boots echoed in the distance. 6 heavily armored Draconis guards rounded the corner, their energy rifles held at the ready. A new kind of robotic sentry floated silently behind them, its optical sensors glowing with cold blue light. "Damn," Gary muttered. "Didn't account for those." Astra's hand tightened on her pulse pistol. "The sentries are programmed to detect unauthorized energy signatures. We can't risk a firefight." Gary quickly assessed the situation. "I might have something, give me a minute." He reached into his pack and pulled out a small metallic sphere. "Improvised EMP should fry its circuits, but we need to be close." He activated the sphere, its surface crackling with energy. "On my mark," he whispered. 3, 2, 1. He tossed the EMP sphere towards the sentry. The device detonated with a flash of blinding light and a sharp crackle. The sentry sputtered, its optical sensors dimming before it crashed to the floor, inert. The Draconis guards paused, momentarily disoriented. "Now!" Gary yelled. They sprinted past the guards, diving into a side corridor before the soldiers could react. "That bought us some time," Gary said, breathing heavily. "But they'll be on high alert now." They reached the central research lab. The scene inside was horrifying. Dozens of captured Draconis were strapped into chairs, their minds connected to a complex array of machinery. Scientists in white coats scurried around them, monitoring the readings on glowing consoles. The air hummed with the oppressive energy of the Mind Pearl technology. Astra gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. That's Counselor Vala," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "She was an advisor to my mother. What are they doing to her?" Vala's eyes were vacant, her face pale and drawn. Wires snaked from her temples, feeding into a large, crystalline structure that pulsed with an eerie light. "Astra, we need to focus," Gary said, gently placing a hand on her arm. "We have to disable the facility first. We can't save anyone if we get caught." Her eyebrows furrowed, her inner turmoil a palpable thing. "I want to save her now. Now, immediately." He met her gaze, his own filled with empathy. "I know, but we stick to the plan, trust me." He activated the disruptor rifle, aiming it at the central amplification array. "Here goes nothing." He squeezed the trigger. A beam of energy shot from the rifle, striking the array with pinpoint accuracy. The crystalline structure flickered, then shattered into a million pieces. Alarms blared throughout the facility, bathing the lab in flashing red light. The scientists screamed and scrambled for cover. "Let's go," Gary shouted, grabbing Astra's hand. As they fled the lab, Lyra's voice came over the comms, strained and urgent. "Gary, we're pinned down near the control room. They were waiting for us. This is a trap." Suddenly, a holographic image flickered to life in the center of the lab. It was Saurian, his reptilian face twisted into a cruel smile. "Welcome, Princess Astra," he sneered. "I knew Varkas would betray you. It was all part of my plan." Astra froze, her eyes wide with shock. You knew." "Indeed," Saurian chuckled. "And now, thanks to your little rescue mission, I have everything I need. The amplified memories are almost complete. Soon, I will have a Mind Pearl super weapon capable of controlling the entire Draconis population. Your people will be mine to command." The holographic image flickered and disappeared. Sirens wailed as the facility went on full alert. Gary and Astra found themselves cornered by a squad of elite Draconis soldiers, their armor gleaming in the red light. Leading them was a hulking figure with cybernetic enhancements grafted onto his face. "You will not interfere with Lord Saurian's plans," the commander growled. his voice a synthesized rasp. Gary and Astra, separated from their group, were forced to retreat, diving into a restricted access area. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. The room was dark and cold, filled with the hum of dormant machinery. As their eyes adjusted, they saw it, a hidden laboratory filled with advanced mind pearl prototypes, far more powerful than anything they had encountered before. The mind pearl prototypes hummed softly on the metal table, their surfaces cool and smooth to the touch. Intricate latticeworks of silver filament pulsed with a faint, inner light beneath the translucent casing. Gary held one up, rotating it slowly. They look like simple neural amplifiers, but they are not, Astra finished, her voice tight. She pointed to a series of microscopic ports along the device's edge. These interfaces are far too precise. They are designed for targeted memory manipulation, not mere amplification. Astra reached for one of the prototypes, her scaled fingers trembling slightly. If I could just access Saurian's plans. Gary gently placed his hand over hers, stopping her. Astra, no. We don't know what these things are truly capable of. It's too risky. Frustration flashed in her reptilian eyes. But if I could just see what he intends. We'll find another way, Gary insisted, his voice firm but gentle. He turned to a nearby console, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Let's try a different approach. Human Psychology 101. Everyone leaves a trace. He began modifying another prototype, rerouting power conduits and recalibrating the neural interface. I'm going to try and create a localized memory scan. It won't access anyone's mind directly, but it should pick up residual neural activity from the lab itself, like psychic dust bunnies. After a few tense minutes, a shimmering image materialized above the console, a ghostly overlay of the lab, depicting recent activity. There, Gary said, pointing to a section near the holding cells. Saurian was there recently, and he wasn't alone. The scan revealed a group of Draconis prisoners, their eyes glazed over, their movements stiff and unnatural. One figure stood out, a Draconis female with distinctive markings, Astra's mother's advisor, Lyra. Astra gasped, her claws extending slightly. Lyra, what has he done to her? Without another word, Astra turned and sprinted towards the holding cells, her heavy footsteps echoing through the lab. Astra, wait. It could be a trap. Gary shouted, but she was already gone. He cursed under his breath and grabbed a disruptor pistol from a nearby weapons rack. Stubborn as a mule, he muttered, before taking off after her. He activated the lab's internal comm system, triggering a series of alarms in a remote section of the facility. Hopefully, that would draw some of the guards away from Astra's path. He was no soldier, but he could make a decent distraction. Just as he rounded a corner, his comm crackled to life. It was Lyra, her voice strained. Gary, the main team failed to secure the control room. They ran into heavy defenses. We're retreating. We can't provide support. Understood, Gary replied, his heart sinking. They were on their own. He found Astra standing before a reinforced cell, her face etched with horror. Inside, Lyra stood rigidly, her eyes vacant, a faint smile playing on her lips. Lyra, Astra said softly, reaching out a hand. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Astra's. Greetings, Princess Astra. I am here to serve Saurian. He is our savior. Before Astra could react, Lyra lunged forward, her movements surprisingly swift and precise. She threw a punch that would have shattered Astra's jaw, but Astra managed to deflect it, stumbling backward. Gary burst into the room, firing a stun blast at Lyra, but she sidestepped it with unnerving agility. Saurian had programmed her well. Astra, get out of here. She's been mind-controlled. Gary yelled, firing another blast. Astra hesitated, torn between her desire to save Lyra and the need to protect herself. She parried another blow, feeling the unnatural strength behind it. It wasn't Lyra anymore. Gary tackled Lyra, wrestling her to the ground, but she was too strong. She flipped him over, pinning him beneath her. Gary, Astra cried, raising her disruptor pistol. She couldn't bring herself to shoot Lyra, not the Lyra she knew. But the Lyra before her wasn't the same. She was a weapon and Gary was in the crosshairs. With a surge of dedication, Astra fired, aiming for Lyra's neural implant. The disruptor beam struck true and Lyra convulsed, her body going limp. Gary pushed her off, gasping for air. "Are you okay?" Astra stared at Lyra's unconscious form, her face pale. "What have I done?" Suddenly, a holographic image flickered to life in the center of the room. Saurian. "Ah, Princess Astra. I see you've made a difficult choice. Pity. Lyra was a key component in my mind control matrix. You've ruined my little experiment's first test." He chuckled, a chilling sound that echoed through the lab. "Your compassion is your weakness, Princess, my greatest advantage." With a flick of his wrist, Saurian activated a shimmering energy field, sealing off the section of the lab. "Consider this a containment zone. I have other uses for you both." He paused, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, and one more thing, a little failsafe, if you will. If the mind control process is interrupted, as you so rudely did, the captured Draconis will have their minds wiped completely. Empty shells, vegetables, no memory, no thoughts, nothing." Gary's eyes narrowed, focusing on the shimmering barrier that held the Draconis prisoners. He analyzed the containment field's energy signature, muttering, "The frequency modulation. It's unstable and definitely alien design. I'm seeing a harmonic drift that shouldn't be there." Astra suddenly gasped, clutching her head. "The others. I can hear them. They're begging for help. They know what's coming. The mind wipe. Please, Gary, we have to do something." Her voice was permeated with desperation. Gary's brow furrowed. "The containment field generator. It's also linked to the mind control device. Disabling the field could disrupt Saurian's entire operation, but it's a huge risk. There could be a failsafe, something that fries their brains instantly if the field collapses improperly." He started scavenging components from the scattered lab equipment, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I think I can rig a device to emit a counter-frequency pulse, designed to overload the generator. But it's a long shot, and I'm working with scraps." "It's our only chance," Astra insisted, her eyes blazing with purpose. Gary paused, looking directly at her. "Astra, this is incredibly dangerous. If I fail, the lab systems could completely collapse. It could harm them, even kill them." Astra met his gaze, her voice firm. "We proceed. Their lives are worth the risk." She examined the schematics Gary had pulled up on a damaged console. "The modulation matrix. Try inverting the phase harmonics. That might create a more disruptive feedback loop." Her scientific aptitude surprised him. Gary nodded, incorporating her suggestion into his design. He worked quickly, soldering wires and adjusting settings. "All right, here goes nothing." He activated the device. The containment field flickered violently, the energy shimmering and distorting. Suddenly, the mind-controlled advisor lunged at them again, her eyes wide and unfocused, but a flicker of something akin to recognition crossed her face. Astra hesitated, seeing a glimmer of her former friend in the advisor's eyes. "Ilara." The advisor seized the opportunity, slamming her fist into Gary's device, sending sparks flying. Without thinking, Gary threw himself in front of Astra, shielding her from the brunt of the attack. The device was further damaged, and a jolt of energy coursed through his body, leaving him momentarily stunned. Astra, enraged, roared, a primal sound that echoed through the lab. She grabbed the advisor, her Draconis strength amplified by fury, and subdued her with brutal efficiency, rendering her unconscious. But it was too late. The containment field stabilized, the flickering subsided, and the counter-frequency pulse failed. A holographic image of Saurian flickered to life, his voice dripping with amusement. "Such valiant efforts, but ultimately futile. Did you truly believe you could outsmart me? I anticipated your little attempt and reinforced the containment field accordingly." He raised a hand, and a low, guttural hum filled the air. "Now, the mind wipe sequence shall commence." A wave of agonizing screams erupted from the Draconis prisoners. Astra collapsed to her knees, clutching her head, overwhelmed by their pain. Tears streamed down her face. Gary, despite his injuries, forced himself to focus. He listened intently to the screams, his brow furrowing. There was a pattern, a subtle, almost imperceptible harmonic frequency embedded within the cacophony of pain. "Astra," he said urgently, "the mind wipe. It's not instantaneous, it's a process. They're fighting it unconsciously. They're emitting a signal, a distress call." He theorized rapidly, his mind racing. The mind wipe process must be disrupting their natural energy fields, causing them to unconsciously broadcast a specific harmonic frequency. If we can amplify and redirect that frequency back at Saurian's device, we might be able to overload it, disrupt the process, and free them. Astra, regaining a measure of composure, looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "But how? The device is destroyed." "We don't need the device," Gary said, his voice filled with conviction. "We need a conduit, someone who can channel their energy, amplify their signal, and you, Astra, with your unique Draconis physiology might be the key." Astra understood immediately. It would be excruciating, a direct link to the collective pain of her people, but she didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." She closed her eyes, reaching out telepathically to the prisoners, focusing on their pain, their fear, their desperate hope. She began to channel their harmonic frequency through her body. Agony ripped through her. Her scales shimmered and cracked, her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and she screamed, a sound that mirrored the prisoners' suffering. But with each scream, the signal grew stronger, more focused. The amplified harmonic frequency surged through the lab, overwhelming Saurian's mind-controlled device. The machine sputtered and sparked, its energy output fluctuating wildly. A chain reaction erupted throughout the lab systems. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the containment field collapsed entirely. The Draconis prisoners were freed, their minds reeling from the sudden release. But the lab was now in full self-destruct mode, the walls groaning and the floor shaking. Saurian's holographic image flickered and disappeared, leaving only static. "We have to get out of here," Gary yelled, grabbing Astra's hand. They raced through the chaotic lab, guiding the disoriented prisoners towards the main entrance. As they burst through the doorway, they found Lyra and her team, weapons drawn, engaging Saurian's remaining forces. They had breached the main entrance. But even as relief washed over them, Gary knew this was just getting started. They were still being hunted, and Saurian was still out there. Lyra barked orders, her voice a sharp counterpoint to the lab's groaning metal. "Fall back, cover the exits. Williams, get those people moving." Plasma fire sizzled past, charring the already damaged consoles. She spared a glance at Gary, his face grimed with soot, Astra supporting his weight. The freed prisoners, disoriented and weak, stumbled behind them. Ignoring the throbbing pain in his side, Gary scanned the chaotic scene. The main corridors were compromised, choked with debris and Saurian's rapidly advancing security forces. "Astra, can you support the wounded?" She nodded grimly, her reptilian eyes narrowed with grit. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind the main power conduit. Less obvious, smaller, but it's our best shot." He pushed forward, Astra and several of the freed prisoners following close behind. The tunnel was cramped, barely wide enough for a Draconis to navigate comfortably. The air hung thick with the smell of ozone and decay. As they squeezed through the narrow passage, the hum of Saurian security drones grew louder. Small red lights flickered in the darkness, scanning for movement. Astra, despite her regal bearing, moved with surprising agility, guiding the more weakened prisoners. "Keep low," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. "They hunt by heat signature and movement. Conserve your energy." She pressed a hand against the arm of a trembling Granak, his scales dull with exhaustion. "Think of freedom. Think of home." Gary, wincing with each step, spotted a junction box sparking erratically. An idea sparked in his mind. "Astra, give me cover." He ripped open the panel, ignoring the shower of sparks. With a few deft movements, he rerouted the power flow, overloading the system. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the tunnel into darkness. A loud EMP blast echoed through the tunnel system, temporarily disabling the drones. "Move now," Gary yelled, shoving the prisoners forward. "That won't hold them for long." Outside, Lyra's team was taking heavy fire. A guttural roar and the sickening thud of a body hitting the ground signaled another casualty. "Damn it," Lyra cursed, her voice tight with frustration. "We're losing ground." "Fall back, regroup at the forest perimeter." They burst from the maintenance tunnel into the alien forest, a dense tangle of bioluminescent flora and towering, spore-laden trees. The air was thick with humidity and the cloying scent of decaying vegetation. The forest offered temporary cover, but the sounds of pursuit osing in. Even from this distance, Gary could hear the distinctive whine of the hunter-seeker units. They were fast, agile, and designed for this environment. He knelt, placing a hand on the damp earth, feeling the vibrations. "They're using thermal and sonic sensors," he said grimly. "But the foliage is so dense, their range is limited. They'll be relying on triangulation." Astra, her eyes scanning the surroundings, began stripping fronds from a nearby plant, weaving them into a makeshift camouflage. "The Draconis are masters of camouflage," she said, her voice regaining some of its former authority. "We will use what the forest provides. We will also build some traps." Lyra, her face etched with concern, approached. "The prisoners, they're not doing well." "The mind wipe process. It's left them disoriented, weak. They need medical attention and fast." Gary rubbed his temples, his mind racing. "We need to find a secure location, set up a temporary clinic." Astra shook her head, her scales shimmering in the dappled GHT. "No, we must reach the hidden Draconis resistance cell. They are not far from here. They have the resources to help our people. And lead Saurian straight to them." Gary countered, his voice rising in frustration. "We can't risk it." Before Astra could reply, the whine of the hunter-seeker units intensified. I&Y were closing in. "They're here," Lyra shouted, raising her plasma rifle. "Move, scatter." The group broke apart, fleeing into the dense undergrowth. Gary grabbed Astra's hand, pulling her along. They crashed through the underbrush, the hunter-seeker units hot on their trail. As they ran, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an abandoned alien research outpost, its metal walls scarred and overgrown with vegetation. The door hung ajar, beckoning them inside. "Shelter," Gary gasped, his chest heaving. "Maybe supplies." They cautiously entered the outpost. The air inside was stale and musty, filled with the echoes of long-forgotten experiments. Dust lay thick on the consoles and equipment. As Gary activated the outpost's emergency lights, Astra noticed a message etched into a nearby lab table. It was written in an archaic Draconis dialect. "Gary, look." The message was a warning, left by a previous researcher. "Saurian seeks not knowledge but control. The mind wipe process is only the beginning, his ultimate goal, to create a hive mind controlled by him alone." Gary's blood ran cold. This was bigger than just slavery. He moved to the communication panel, hoping to send a distress signal. "Maybe we can reach anyone." He activated the emergency beacon. Instantly the console flickered to life, but instead of a friendly face, Saurian's distorted image filled the screen. Well, Saurian's voice dripped with malice. "I see you found a little sanctuary. Pity it won't last. And it seems your little diversion has been taken care of as well." Gary felt a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Saurian chuckled. "Lyra and your little band of escapees are my guests now. Such a shame, but perhaps we can make a trade." His image flickered, revealing a glimpse of Lyra and the prisoners bound and gagged, their faces pale with fear. Astra gasped, her eyes widening in horror. "What do you want?" "Simple," Saurian said, his voice smooth as venom. "Your surrender, princess. In exchange for the safety of your friends and those rescued slaves." Astra froze, her face a mask of anguish. The impossible choice hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Astra's scaled hand tightened on the control panel, her reptilian eyes, usually shimmering with emerald light, now dulled with a heavy resignation. "I will do it," she said, her voice a low rasp, barely audible above the hum of the failing outpost. "For their safety, for my people." The words were spoken with regal drive, yet a tremor betrayed the internal conflict raging within her. "My duty is to them, even if it means surrendering myself to Saurian's whims." Gary's eyes hardened. "Absolutely not," he snapped, his voice echoing in the cramped control room. "We are not handing you over to that. That thing. He can't be trusted, Astra. I feel it in my gut. There has to be another way." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar to Astra, a tell revealing his mounting anxiety. "Besides," he added, his voice softening slightly, "I didn't drag you this far just to watch you sacrifice yourself." A klaxon blared, cutting through the tension. Red lights pulsed across the control panel. "Automated perimeter breach detected," a synthesized voice announced. "Multiple incursions on sectors 4 through 7. Astra's eyes widened. "He's not waiting," she hissed. "He's already moving." Gary cursed under his breath. As if on cue, a new alarm wailed, higher-pitched and more frantic than the first. "Core instability alert," the synthesized voice shrieked. "Critical meltdown imminent. Estimated time to failure 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Gary exclaimed, his eyes darting around the room. "We're out of time." Astra, however, was already at work. Her fingers danced across the Draconis interface, lines of code scrolling across the screen in a language Gary couldn't decipher. "I am analyzing Saurian's communication signal," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There are hidden layers, encrypted data." A few moments later, her eyes snapped open. "Why no?" Ed in horror. "Number," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He intends to use the freed prisoners as test subjects." "Test subjects?" Gary asked, his voice permeated with dread. "For a new mind control technology," Astra confirmed, her voice shaking. "He plans to break their wills, turn them into puppets." Gary's face hardened. He was never going to let them go. He was never going to honor any deal. He looked at Astra, his eyes blazing. "He was going to betray you regardless." Astra's shoulders straightened, the resignation gone, replaced by a fierce tenacity. "Then we fight," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound tenacity. "I will not allow him to use my people like that. I will not surrender my freedom." "That's what I'm talking about," Gary said, a grin spreading across his face. "All right, princess. Let's give this overgrown leech a fight he won't forget." He immediately began assessing the outpost's failing systems, his mind already racing. "This power grid is fried, but I think I can reroute some of the energy to create a few unpleasant surprises for our guests." Astra, meanwhile, was delving deeper into the outpost systems. "I have accessed the security logs," she announced. "There is a hidden armory, containing advanced Draconis weaponry. Working in perfect sync, Gary rerouted power conduits, creating makeshift electrical traps in the corridors, while Astra navigated the outpost's labyrinthine layout, leading them to a hidden chamber behind a false wall. Inside, racks of sleek, unfamiliar weapons gleamed in the dim light. "All right," Gary said, hefting a pulse rifle that felt surprisingly comfortable in his hands. "Let's get armed. Then we're going to use that emergency transport system to evacuate the prisoners and lure Saurian right into our little reception." They moved quickly, arming themselves and the freed prisoners with whatever weapons they could find. Hope flickered in the eyes of the rescued as they prepared to defend themselves. With a plan in place, Astra initiated the transport sequence. The platform shuddered to life, bathed in an eerie blue glow. "Destination locked," the synthesized voice announced. "Initiating transport in T-60 seconds. "Where's it going?" Gary asked, his brow furrowed. Astra checked the coordinates on the control panel. Her eyes widened in alarm. It is programmed to travel to a preset location, Saurian's main research facility. He knew, Gary said, his voice grim. He anticipated this. Suddenly, the control panel sparked and the synthesized voice changed, becoming distorted and menacing. "Foolish Draconis," it rasped, now clearly Saurian's voice. "Did you think you could outwit me? The transport is now under my control. You are trapped." The transport bay doors slammed shut with a resounding boom. Astra frantically worked at the controls, trying to regain control of the system. "He has overridden the controls remotely," she cried. "We are sealed inside. The launch sequence has been initiated." As the countdown ticked towards 0, Astra spotted a small, almost imperceptible switch hidden beneath a panel. "There," she shouted, pointing. "A manual override." Before she could reach it, however, a volley of laser fire erupted from the doorway. Security robots, their metallic bodies gleaming, swarmed into the room, weapons raised. Astra threw herself in front of Gary, deflecting the shots with her armored scales, but a searing pain ripped through her shoulder. She cried out, stumbling backward. "Astra!" Gary yelled, scooping her up in his arms. He ignored the searing heat of the transport platform as it began to activate, his focus solely on Astra. He stumbled into the transport, cradling her clothes. "Hang on," he gasped, his fingers fumbling for the override switch. "Just hang on." The transport lurched violently, throwing them against the wall. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and the countdown reached its final seconds. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Gary slammed his hand down on the hidden switch. The transport roared to life, hurtling through space. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a bone-jarring shudder, the trajectory shifted. Instead of hurtling towards Saurian's research facility, the transport veered off course, plunging into the swirling chaos of the Draconis wildlands. The last thing Gary saw before losing consciousness was the jagged, unforgiving landscape rushing up to meet them. The transport bucked violently, alarms blaring as the gravity plating failed. A cascade of sparks erupted from the control panel as Gary fought to maintain control, but it was a losing battle. "Brace yourself," he yelled over the din, grabbing Astra and pulling her close as the small vessel hurtled toward the dense jungle canopy below. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed, safety restraints dug into their flesh, and the world spun in a chaotic blur of green and gray. Then silence. A ringing silence broken only by the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the drip of fluids. Gary groaned, his head throbbing. He pushed himself up, wincing at the sharp pain in his shoulder. Astra, are you all right?" Astra stirred beside him, her scaled face contorted in pain. I am alive," she rasped, struggling to sit up. Gary carefully assessed her injuries. A gash on her arm oozed iridescent blue blood, and she favored her left leg. "It's not good, but it could be worse," he said, tearing a strip of fabric from his shirt. "Hold still." He cleaned the wound as best he could and wrapped it tightly. His movements were efficient, practiced the movements of a man who had seen his share of scrapes. Astra, despite her pain, reached for a damaged Draconis tech panel near her seat. "I will scan our surroundings," she said, her voice strained. Even injured, her mind was sharp, calculating. The panel flickered to life, displaying a crude map of the area. "We are deep within the wildlands. Uncharted territory," and her reptilian eyes narrowed. "There are creatures nearby, hostile ones." Gary surveyed the wreckage. The transport was a mess, but the hull was mostly intact. "All right, first things first, let's secure this thing," he said, already moving. "Make sure those emergency shields are up. We need a perimeter." He began reinforcing the transport's defenses, rerouting power and patching breaches with whatever materials he could find. Working together, they managed to create a makeshift shelter within the transport. Astra used her knowledge of Draconis technology to activate the emergency shield, a shimmering energy field that enveloped the ship. "We need resources," Gary said, grabbing a multi-tool. "Food, water, something to signal for help. Stay here, I'll be right back." As Gary ventured out into the jungle, he found the air thick with humidity and the sounds of unseen creatures. Towering trees dripped with moisture, and strange, colorful plants carpeted the forest floor. He noticed a cluster of bioluminescent plants, their bulbous forms glowing with an eerie green light. As he approached, he realized they were emitting a high-frequency sound, almost too high for human ears to detect. It vibrated in his teeth. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A guttural roar echoed through the trees. Gary spun around, his heart pounding, and saw them a pack of predatory draconis beasts, their eyes glowing red in the dim light. They were sleek and muscular, with razor-sharp claws and teeth, and they were heading straight for the transport, drawn by the bioluminescent plants. He sprinted back to the ship, yelling, "Astra, we have company." The beasts slammed into the shield, their claws scraping against the energy field. The transport rocked violently. "The shield won't hold for long." Astra shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Gary scrambled for his engineering tools, his mind racing. He remembered a trick he'd learned back on Earth, using focused sound waves to disrupt animal behavior. "I have an idea," he said, grabbing a sonic emitter and some spare parts. "Help me rig this thing." Working feverishly, they modified the emitter, amplifying its frequency and focusing its beam. Gary aimed the makeshift sonic weapon at the attacking beasts and fired. A high-pitched whine filled the air, causing the creatures to recoil in pain. Astra watched the beasts carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They are not attacking randomly," she said. "They are protecting something." She pointed to a nearby clearing. "That is their nesting ground. The bioluminescent plants attract prey to feed their young." Gary lowered the sonic weapon. "So, we're the bad guys." "We are intruders," Astra corrected. "But we do not have to be destroyers." They made a decision. Instead of fighting, they would find another route, a more difficult path that avoided the nesting ground. It was a risk, but it was the right thing to do. As they continued their trek through the wildlands, they stumbled upon something unexpected: an abandoned draconis research outpost, its walls covered in moss and vines. It was a relic of a forgotten era, a testament to a lost civilization. Inside, they found cryptic messages etched into the walls and fragmented data logs scattered across the floor. The data was corrupted, but Astra was able to salvage some of it. "This outpost, it was used by rebels," she said, her voice hushed. "Those who opposed the current regime." Gary examined the symbols and coded language in the data logs. "A resistance movement," Astra nodded. "A hidden one. They fought against the corruption and tyranny of the ruling clans." They worked together to activate the outpost's long-range communication system, a risky move that could alert their enemies. Gary rerouted power while Astra calibrated the frequency. Finally, they sent a coded message, a desperate plea for help. Days turned into weeks. Hope dwindled. Just when they were about to give up, a response came. A faint signal, barely audible above the static. The resistance had received their message. They provided coordinates for a hidden meeting point deep within the wildlands. As they approached the designated location, they were ambushed. A group of draconis warriors emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn. "Astra of the royal line," their leader snarled. "You are accused of betraying your people, collaborating with a human." The warriors, members of the resistance, revealed that they had been tracking Astra since her enslavement. They questioned her motives for escaping, accusing her of being a traitor. Gary stepped forward, placing himself between Astra and the warriors. "She's not betraying anyone," he said, his voice firm. "She's fighting for the freedom of her people, and I'm her ally." He knew he was risking his life, but he couldn't stand by and let them accuse her. The leader of the resistance, a battle-hardened female draconis named Lyra, studied Astra with skeptical eyes. "We will hear your story, princess," she said, her voice cold. "But know this, human, your presence here is unwelcome, and your intentions are suspect." The moment they stepped fully into the cavern, the air shifted. The humid, earthy smell intensified, mingling with the metallic tang of drawn weapons. 6 Draconis warriors, scales gleaming in the flickering torchlight, leveled energy rifles at them. Their leader, a female with obsidian scales and eyes like chips of volcanic glass, stepped forward. "Lyra." "Disarm them," she commanded, her voice a low, resonant growl. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, relieving Gary of his sidearm and carefully scanning Astra for any hidden weapons. "We take no chances, especially with outsiders." Astra met Lyra's gaze, her own violet eyes pleading. "Lyra, I understand your caution, but I assure you we mean no harm. I am Astra of the royal line. I was enslaved, and this human, Gary, rescued me. He is my ally." Astra's voice, though firm, held a tremor of vulnerability. She knew the weight of Draconis honor, and she hoped it would sway Lyra's judgment. Lyra circled them, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Enslaved? A princess? Such claims are easily made. We have heard whispers of a transport crash, but few details. Tell me, what do you know of the slaver syndicate? What do you know of our customs?" She gestured to her warriors. "Answer truthfully, or face the consequences." The interrogation was relentless. Lyra drilled them on Draconis history, traditions, and the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that defined their society. Astra answered with regal confidence, her knowledge impeccable, but Lyra remained unmoved. Then it was Gary's turn. "And you, human, what is your stake in this? Why risk your life for a Draconis?" Gary met Lyra's intense stare. "I'm a traitor, Lyra. I've seen the rot that's spreading through the galaxy, the corruption and the cruelty. I used to believe in the ideals of the Human Federation, but I've seen too much to ignore it anymore. I know enough about galactic trade routes to know the slaver syndicate has a network reaching into high society, and this wasn't the first transport crash they've caused. When I saw Astra being sold, I couldn't stand by. It was the right thing to do." Lyra paused, considering his words. "And what of your knowledge of our customs?" Gary shrugged. "I've traded with Draconis before. I know you value strength, honor, and loyalty. I know you despise weakness and deceit." Astra stepped forward, her voice ringing with conviction. "Lyra, I can prove my lineage. The Mind Pearl, it is still within me. It can access the memories of my ancestors." Lyra's obsidian eyes narrowed. "The Mind Pearl is a dangerous technology, Princess. It can break a mind as easily as it can enlighten it. But very well. If you are who you say you are, you will know the location of the royal vault and the password to open it." Astra closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts. The Mind Pearl resonated within her, and a flood of memories washed over her. When she opened her eyes, she spoke with unwavering certainty. "The vault is hidden beneath the obsidian falls, guarded by the ancient sentinels. The password is Viridian Dawn." Lyra remained skeptical. "Even if you are Astra, why would a princess align herself with a human? What hold does he have over you?" Gary stepped forward, his voice firm. "I have no hold over her. I'm here because I believe in her. I believe she can bring peace and justice back to Draconis." Lyra scoffed. "Belief is a luxury we cannot afford. Strength is what matters. Prove your worth, human. Prove you are more than just words." She gestured to a training area. "We have a trial. If you pass, I will consider your alliance. If you fail." She trailed off, her meaning clear. The trial was brutal. A gauntlet of obstacles designed to test strength, agility, and combat prowess. Gary, with his lack of formal training, was at a distinct disadvantage, but he was resourceful. He used his knowledge of mechanics to disarm traps, his quick thinking to outmaneuver opponents, and his sheer dedication to push through the pain. He remembered what his father always said: "Sometimes the best weapon is your brain." Finally, bruised and battered, he reached the end of the gauntlet. Lyra watched him, her expression unreadable. "You lack the strength of a Draconis warrior, human," she conceded, "but you possess a cunning and tenacity that I did not expect. You have earned my respect." Astra then stepped forward, placing her hand on Gary's arm. "Now, Lyra, allow me to show you what I can do for this resistance." Astra closed her eyes once more, accessing the Mind Pearl. Lines of glowing energy pulsed across her scales as the knowledge of her ancestors flooded into her mind. When she opened her eyes, she spoke with a chilling certainty. The Slaver Syndicate. It is not just a criminal enterprise. It is backed by powerful figures within our own government. A high-ranking official, Counselor Zarthus, is providing them with protection and resources. A gasp rippled through the assembled warriors. Counselor Zarthus was a respected figure, a pillar of Draconis society. Lyra's expression hardened. This is grave news, Astra. If true, it could shatter our resistance from within. She paused, considering. Very well, I am convinced of your sincerity. You and Gary will be given refuge and support within our ranks. I will share everything I know. She turned to Astra. Our goal is to overthrow the corrupt regime that has brought Draconis to its knees. Will you join us, Princess? Will you reclaim your throne? Astra met Lyra's gaze, her violet eyes blazing with commitment. I will. I pledge my loyalty to the resistance. I will fight to restore honor and justice to Draconis. Lyra nodded, a flicker of warmth in her obsidian eyes. Then follow me. I will show you where the real work begins. She turned and headed towards a seemingly solid rock wall. With a touch of her hand to a concealed panel, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. This is the entrance to our underground base. It is well hidden but not impenetrable. Recently, we've been monitoring the transport crash. We believe someone wants you dead, Astra. We need to move quickly. They followed Lyra into the passage, the rock walls closing in around them. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else. A faint, metallic tang that hinted at the machinery and technology hidden within. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the mountain. As they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, Astra was introduced to other members of the resistance. Warriors, strategists, and engineers, all united by their hatred of the corrupt regime. They eyed her and Gary with suspicion, but Lyra's endorsement seemed to ease their concerns. Gary observed the resistance's operations with a keen eye. He noted their dedication, their resourcefulness, and their unwavering commitment to their cause. Despite their limited resources, they were determined to fight for a better future. Finally, they reached a large cavern, the heart of the resistance base. Tents and makeshift shelters lined the walls, illuminated by flickering energy lamps. Lyra gestured to a small, sparsely furnished tent. These will be your temporary quarters. Rest, prepare yourselves. The rebellion is coming. Astra pivoted, her scaled feet finding purchase on the uneven ground of the training yard. Sweat beaded on her brow ridge, blurring her vision. The morning air hung thick and humid, clinging to her scales like a second skin. Around her, resistance fighters, a motley crew of Draconis from various clans, practiced close-quarters combat. But their style. It was a frantic, almost desperate dance compared to the disciplined, almost ritualistic movement she had learned in the Royal Guard. Her instructor, a wiry Draconis named Krell, barked, "Again, Princess, you fight like you're in a ceremonial duel. This is a war for survival. Use the terrain, improvise." Astra lunged, her hand instinctively reaching for the non-existent energy blade she was accustomed to wielding. Krell sidestepped, his crude vibro knife flashing. The dull thud of metal against her training armor echoed in the yard. She stumbled back, frustration simmering beneath her regal composure. Nearby, Gary hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. He tapped the screen, zooming in on a schematic of the resistance base's perimeter defenses. Several Draconis watched him with open skepticism, their arms crossed over their chests. "With all due respect, human," growled one, a hulking warrior with scarred scales, "what does a trader know of military strategy?" Gary didn't look up. "Traders observe," he said, his voice calm. "We see patterns, your security protocols. They're predictable. You rely too heavily on physical barriers. A simple bypass of the power grid here. he pointed to a junction box highlighted on the display, would disable half your sensors. He tapped another area, and your patrol routes, they're regular. Anyone with a decent scanner could predict them. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting the skeptical gaze of the warrior. Human militaries learned these lessons centuries ago. Stealth, misdirection, redundancy. These are your best defenses. A sudden shriek pierced the air. Astra, caught off guard, staggered as Krell's training blade grazed her arm. But this wasn't training. Krell's eyes were wide with a manic glint, the vibro knife now aimed at her throat. Gary reacted instantly. He hurled a nearby training dummy, a crude, humanoid shape filled with sand, at Krell. The distraction was enough. Lyra, ever vigilant, moved with lightning speed, disarming Krell with a swift kick to the wrist. The vibro knife clattered to the ground. Chaos erupted. Resistance fighters swarmed Krell, pinning him to the ground. He spat and cursed, his eyes still fixed on Astra with a burning intensity. He was mind-controlled, Lyra said, her voice tight, examining Krell's eyes. Some kind of neural implant. She gestured to two guards to drag Krell away. Secure him, find out who's behind this. A wave of distrust washed over the training yard. Eyes darted from one fighter to another, suspicion poisoning the air. Who could be trusted? Who was compromised? Lyra approached Astra and Gary. I'll assign a guard to you both, she said, her voice low, until we sort this out. The guard arrived moments later, a young draconis named Saurian. He was polite, efficient, but something about his demeanor felt off. Gary noticed Saurian constantly glancing towards the main entrance, his hand hovering near his comm device. Gary watched him discreetly. Later that evening, Astra retreated to her quarters, seeking solace in the Mind Pearl. The cool, smooth surface of the device pressed against her forehead. She closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts, and plunged into the swirling vortex of ancestral memories. This time she didn't seek battle strategies or political insights. She searched for betrayal. The memory coalesced. A grand hall filled with draconis nobles in ornate ceremonial armor. Her parents, the king and queen, sat on their thrones, listening intently to a trusted advisor. The advisor, a high-ranking member of Clan Vorlag, spoke of peace treaties and alliances. But in his eyes she saw a flicker of deceit. Then a flash of light, the hall erupting in chaos, assassins emerging from the shadows, her parents, falling. The memory shattered, leaving Astra gasping for air, her head throbbing. Clan Vorlag, a respected clan with deep roots in draconis society. Could it be true? Back in the main command center, Gary fiddled with a disassembled comm device. This is bad, he muttered. Really bad. Astra rushed over. What is it? Someone tampered with the main communication array. It's subtle but effective. They've installed a signal repeater. Anything we transmit is being broadcast to an external source. Astra's scales prickled with dread. They know where we are. Astra sought out Vorlag, the clan leader, in the mess hall. He was a tall, imposing draconis with a booming voice and a reputation for unwavering loyalty. Vorlag, she said, her voice ringing with authority, I need to speak with you. He turned, his expression hardening as he saw her. Princess, what is it? I have reason to believe that someone within your clan is betraying us. Vorlag's eyes narrowed. That is a grave accusation, Princess. Clan Vorlag has served the royal family for generations. I saw it, Astra said, her voice trembling with anger. In the memories of my ancestors, a Vorlag betrayed my parents. Vorlag banged his hand on the table, rattling the metal plates. You dare accuse my clan based on visions? You are sowing discord, Princess, at a time when we need unity. Gary, meanwhile, was studying a holographic map of the surrounding sectors. He tapped his chin, a thoughtful expression on his face. There's something off about the trade routes in this sector, he said to himself. Too many discrepancies, too many unregistered shipments. He cross-referenced the trade data with known syndicate activity. A pattern emerged. Illicit shipments were flowing through a specific sector controlled by a high-ranking draconis official, Counselor Zargoth. the same Zargoth who had been so vocal in his support of the resistance. Lyra gathered a small team, including Gary and Astra. "We need to investigate these shipments," she said, her voice grim. "It's a risk, but we can't ignore this. Zargoth is a powerful man, but if he's involved with the Syndicate..." As they prepared for the mission, Gary found Astra alone in her quarters, staring out at the bleak landscape. He stepped inside. "Hey," he said softly, "you okay?" She turned, her silver eyes filled with a mixture of fear and commitment. "This is all my fault," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I brought this war to your doorstep." Gary stepped closer, taking her hand in his. Her scales were cool to the touch. "Hey, none of this is your fault. We're in this together, remember." He squeezed her hand gently. "Besides," he added with a wry smile, "I'm starting to think I have a thing for Draconis princesses." Astra managed a weak smile. "And I apparently have a thing for resourceful humans who can analyze trade routes and dismantle communication devices." She paused, her gaze searching his. "Gary." Before she could finish, an alarm blared through the base. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Lyra's voice crackled over the comm system. "All personnel, report to the command center immediately. We have intercepted a coded message." In the command center, the message was displayed on a large holographic screen. It was a series of complex glyphs, but Lyra's codebreakers had already deciphered it. "The Syndicate," Lyra said, her voice grim, "is planning a large-scale raid on a Draconis settlement in the Kepler 186F system. They're targeting a mining colony, known for its rich deposits of..." She paused, looking at Astra. "Mined pearls." Astra's eyes widened in horror. "We have to warn them," she said, her voice urgent. "Those pearls, they're irreplaceable, and the people..." "We can't," Lyra said, shaking her head. "We don't have the resources. We need to focus on our primary mission, exposing Zargoth." "But those people will die," Astra pleaded. "We can't just stand by and let that happen." Gary stepped forward. "There might be a way," he said, his mind racing. "I can modify a human communication device. It won't be powerful enough for a long-range transmission, but it might be enough to send a warning signal to the settlement." He worked feverishly, stripping wires, rerouting circuits, and bypassing security protocols. Hours later, he stood before the modified device, sweat dripping from his brow. "It's a long shot," he said, "but it's the best we can do." He activated the device. A burst of energy pulsed through the air, sending a coded warning signal hurtling towards the Kepler 186F system. The warning reached the settlement just in time. The miners, alerted to the impending attack, managed to evacuate before the Syndicate ships arrived. But their success came at a price. The Syndicate, having intercepted the signal, traced it back to the general vicinity of the Resistance base. The team returned from their mission, exhausted but triumphant. They had discovered the illicit shipments, hidden beneath a false bottom in a cargo freighter. The crates were filled with advanced weaponry, energy rifles, and plasma grenades, all marked with the symbol of Zargoth's personal guard. "We have proof," Astra said, her voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Zargoth is working with the Syndicate." But as they approached the base, a horrifying sight greeted them. Smoke billowed from the entrance. The air was thick with the stench of burning metal and decaying flesh. The Resistance base was under attack. They raced towards the entrance, weapons drawn. The scene inside was a nightmare. Resistance fighters lay dead or wounded, their bodies scattered amidst the rubble. Syndicate mercenaries clad in black armor moved through the base with ruthless efficiency, executing survivors. Lyra, her armor scorched and torn, emerged from the chaos, dragging herself towards them. "Astra," she gasped, her voice weak. "Zargoth, he betrayed us. The high-ranking official is involved." She coughed, blood trickling from her lips. "Astra, you're the key to stopping him." She looked up, her eyes filled with a desperate urgency. The sounds of approaching footsteps echoed behind her. "He's coming. I don't have much time." "Zarthus, Senator Zarthus." Lyra's scaled hand tightened around Astra's, then went limp. Her reptilian eyes, once vibrant with defiance, glazed over. The acrid smell of burnt circuits and spilled ichor filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Astra knelt beside her, the cold durasteel floor pressing against her knees. Lyra, her mentor, her friend, was gone. A wave of grief washed over Astra, threatening to drown her. She clenched her fists, fighting back tears. Zarthus. The name echoed in her mind, a viper coiled ready to strike. She had to avenge Lyra, but more importantly, she had to expose Zarthus before he could inflict further damage. The ground trembled. Enemy fire intensified, tearing through the already ravaged base. Astra, we have to move, Gary shouted, pulling her to her feet. They, along with a handful of surviving resistance members, scrambled through the wreckage, dodging laser fire and collapsing debris. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of the dying. Gary led the way, his human agility a stark contrast to the Draconis' heavier gait. They reached a hidden escape tunnel just as the enemy forces breached the main chamber. Emerging from the tunnel, they found themselves in a dense forest at the base of the mountains. The air was crisp and clean, a welcome change from the toxic atmosphere of the base. They pressed on, scaling treacherous paths until they reached a remote Draconis shrine nestled high in the peaks. The shrine, an ancient structure of carved stone and polished obsidian, offered a sanctuary from the chaos, but the grief was inescapable. Astra stood before a weathered altar, her shoulders slumped. The weight of Lyra's death, the loss of the resistance, and the daunting task ahead threatened to crush her. "I don't know if I can do this, Gary," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Lyra believed in me, my people believe in me, but I feel so lost." Gary stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm. His touch was warm and grounding. "You are strong, Astra. You've survived so much. You are the hope your people need. And you're not alone. I'm here, and so are the others. We'll face this together." He met her gaze, his eyes filled with unwavering willpower. "Don't give up now." His words, simple yet powerful, resonated within her. She straightened her shoulders, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "I can't give up, not now, not ever." She turned to the shrine's central dais where the mind pearl rested. The smooth, opalescent sphere pulsed with a faint, inner light. Closing her eyes, Astra reached out and touched the pearl. A rush of ancestral memories flooded her mind, the wisdom of generations, the triumphs and failures of her lineage. She focused on memories related to Senator Zarthus, searching for any hint of his treachery. But initially, she found nothing concrete. Only veiled hints, whispers of corruption hidden beneath layers of political maneuvering. Frustration welled up inside her. She was running out of time. "What if we tried a different approach?" Gary suggested, his brow furrowed in thought. "You said Zarthus is connected to the slaver syndicate. What if we looked at his finances, see if there are any unusual patterns of wealth accumulation?" Astra considered his suggestion. It was a human approach, pragmatic and direct. She refocused her mind, accessing ancestral financial memories. Lines of code and transaction histories flashed before her eyes. She searched for anomalies, for discrepancies that didn't fit. Then she found it. A series of hidden accounts, offshore transfers, and illicit transactions linked to Zarthus and the slaver syndicate. The evidence was damning. A surge of anger coursed through her veins. "He's been using his position to line his pockets, selling out our people to the slavers," she snarled, her claws flexing. "Where does the money lead?" Gary asked, his voice urgent. Astra delved deeper into the financial records. The transactions pointed to a secret meeting location on a remote moon orbiting Draconis. Zarthus was scheduled to meet with representatives of the syndicate in a few days. "We have to go there," Astra said, her voice filled with dedication. "We have to gather evidence of his betrayal and expose him." "It's a trap," one of the resistance members protested. "Zarthus will be expecting us." "It's a risk we have to take," Astra countered. This is our chance to strike at the heart of the conspiracy. They spent the next few hours modifying a small transport ship, disguising it as a common cargo vessel. Gary, using his knowledge of shipping lanes and cargo manifests, programmed the ship's transponder to avoid detection. As they journeyed towards the moon, Astra and Gary sat in the cramped cockpit, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them, a canvas of stars and swirling nebulae. What happens after this, Astra? Gary asked, his voice soft. If we succeed in exposing Zarthus, what will you do? Astra looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. I want to rebuild our world to create a future where no Draconis suffers the way I have, but I also want a future with you, Gary. Is that even possible? Gary reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. Anything is possible, Astra. We'll face whatever challenges come our way together. They arrived at the moon under the cover of darkness. The surface was barren and desolate, a landscape of jagged rocks and deep craters. The air was thin and cold, and the silence was deafening. They landed the ship in a secluded canyon and made their way towards the meeting location, a hidden underground facility concealed beneath a layer of rock and ice. Gary used his technical skills to bypass the security systems, disabling cameras and overriding access codes. Inside, they found themselves in a vast chamber filled with flickering holographic displays and heavily armed guards. In the center of the chamber, Zarthus stood at a table, negotiating with a group of shadowy figures representatives of the slaver syndicate. In exchange for continued financial support and political protection, Zarthus said, his voice smooth and oily, I can guarantee you access to even more Draconis resources. Slaves, minerals, technology, whatever you desire. Astra felt a surge of revulsion. Zarthus was selling out his own people for personal gain. She had to stop him. As they attempted to gather more evidence, Gary accidentally bumped against a metal conduit, triggering an alarm. Red lights flashed and a deafening siren wailed through the facility. Intruders! Zarthus roared, his face contorted with rage. Capture them. Guards swarmed towards them, weapons drawn. Zarthus pointed a finger at Astra, his eyes filled with venom. Kill them. They know too much. Astra and Gary engaged in a desperate fight for survival. Astra, with her Draconis strength and agility, fought with a ferocity born of rage and desperation. Gary, though outmatched physically, used his quick wit and resourcefulness to disarm and disable his opponents. During the fight, Astra managed to transmit a coded message containing evidence of Zarthus's treason to a trusted contact within the Draconis government. It was a gamble, but it was their only hope. They fought their way towards the exit, dodging laser fire and exploding grenades. But their ship was damaged in the crossfire. As they blasted off from the landing pad, the ship sputtered and shook violently. We're losing power, Gary shouted, struggling to maintain control. The ship careened out of control, plummeting towards the moon's surface. With a deafening crash, they slammed into the ground. The world went black. Astra gasped, her lungs burning with recycled air that tasted of ozone and something metallic. Pain lanced through her left arm, a sharp, insistent throb that echoed the groaning of the twisted metal around her. Gary coughed beside her, his breath ragged. He pushed himself up, wincing. Astra, you all right? She nodded, testing her arm. Injured but functional, the ship. It is not. Her reptilian eyes, adjusting to the dim emergency lighting, scanned the wreckage. The transport vessel was a mangled mess of durasteel and sparking wires, embedded in the gray, lifeless dust of the moon. Gary ran a hand over his head, finding a gash on his temple. Comms are fried. I'm not getting anything. He moved to the control panel, his fingers dancing over the damaged circuits. The emergency beacon. It's still got power, but the array is shot. We're shouting into the void. Perhaps not, Astra said, her voice surprisingly calm. The beacon functions, but its reach is. Limited, we must amplify it. Gary turned, hope flickering in his eyes. Can we fix the array? Astra shook her head. Impossible, but Draconis vessels utilize modular systems. Salvaging components. That is feasible. She pointed to a section of the ship's hull where a panel had partially detached, revealing a tangle of wires and circuitry. The frequency modulator and the signal booster, if they are intact. All right, let's get to it. Gary pulled himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his ribs. I'll check the power core. See if it's stable enough to give us a kick. They worked in silence, the only sounds the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the clatter of tools against metal. Gary, ever the optimist, was soon cursing the ship's design. Astra was methodical. She focused on each task with the precision that Gary had come to admire. The air grew colder as the ship's internal heating failed. We cannot remain here, Astra said, her scales shimmering in the dying light. The environmental seals will fail soon. Gary nodded, his breath misting in the air. Agreed. Let's see what this moon has to offer. Venturing outside was like stepping onto another planet. The thin atmosphere scratched at their throats, and the temperature plummeted with the setting of the artificial sun. The landscape was a desolate expanse of gray dust and jagged rocks, bathed in the eerie glow of distant stars. Damn, Gary muttered, pulling his environmental suit tighter. This is worse than I thought. Astra shivered, her Draconis physiology struggling to regulate her body temperature. My people are desert dwellers, but this is beyond endurance. Gary examined his suit's display. The thermal regulators are shot, will freeze solid in a few hours. He began rummaging through his pack, pulling out a handful of salvaged components. Let's see if we can't improve this thing. He began to work, his fingers nimble despite the biting cold, integrating pieces of the ship's cooling system into his suit and Astra's. What is that you are doing? Astra asked, observing him with curiosity. Improvising, Gary replied, grinning. Humanity's greatest strength. Soon, both suits were humming with jury-rigged thermal regulators providing a marginal but crucial increase in warmth. Astra pointed towards a dark, gaping maw in the side of a nearby crater. There, a cave system, shelter perhaps, and a potential source of thermal energy. The cave was a welcome respite from the brutal environment. The temperature was still frigid, but the wind was blocked, and a faint geothermal warmth emanated from the depths. I'm detecting thermal vents deeper inside, Astra said, consulting her suit's sensors. If we can channel that energy and combine it with the ship's power core, we might just have a chance, Gary finished, his eyes gleaming with new hope. We'll use the thermal vents to boost the signal. It's risky, but it's our best shot. The power core was heavy, awkward to move, and bathed in residual radiation. They worked together, grunting with effort, inching it towards the cave entrance. The terrain was treacherous, littered with unstable rocks and deep crevices. Careful, Gary shouted as Astra stumbled, nearly losing her grip. He reached out, steadying her. As they worked, Astra paused, her eyes unfocused. A faint luminescence emanated from her brow. There are crystals, she murmured, her voice distant. Moon crystals, they amplify energy, enhance signals. Gary stared at her, his heart pounding. What are you talking about? Astra blinked, shaking her head. A memory from my ancestors. They used these crystals to communicate across vast distances. Hope surged through Gary. Can you find them? Astra closed her eyes, focusing. Deeper. Within the cave, a vein of luminescent crystals. They ventured deeper, the geothermal warmth increasing with each step. The cave walls shimmered with moisture, reflecting the faint light from their suits. Finally, they found a vein of crystals embedded in the rock, glowing with an ethereal blue light. Incredible, Gary breathed, reaching out to touch one of the crystals. It pulsed with a soft, warm energy. Working quickly, they harvested the crystals and integrated them into their makeshift communication system, placing them around the salvaged beacon array. The crystals glowed brighter, bathing the cave in an otherworldly light. "All right, let's do this," Gary said, his voice tight with anticipation. He activated the beacon. A low hum filled the cave, building in intensity as the crystals amplified the signal. "The signal is broadcasting," Astra confirmed, monitoring the readings on her suit's display. "It is weak, but it carries the data." The evidence of Zarthus's treason. Far away on a Draconis warship orbiting the moon, a communications officer frowned. "My lord, we have detected a distress signal, a fragmented message, originating from the crash site." Zarthus, his reptilian eyes narrowed, approached the console. "Patch it through." The message crackled to life, a distorted jumble of data but clear enough to reveal the truth. Zarthus's scales darkened with rage. "Silence them. Immediately dispatch a squad, elite guard, I want them dead." Back in the cave, Astra's head snapped up. "They know a Draconis patrol is inbound." Gary cursed. "How long?" "Minutes," Astra said grimly, consulting the ship's damaged sensors. "They are fast." "All right, time to get creative," Gary said, his mind racing. "This cave's our only advantage. Let's make it count." He grabbed his pack, pulling out a roll of detonator cord and several small explosive charges. They worked quickly, setting up a series of traps and defensive positions within the cave system. Gary used his knowledge of explosives to rig a cave in near the entrance, hoping to delay the soldiers. Astra, despite her injury, used her knowledge of Draconis tactics to identify strategic choke points. The Draconis soldiers arrived with ruthless efficiency. They stormed into the cave, weapons raised, their reptilian eyes scanning the darkness. The battle was short, brutal, and chaotic. Blaster fire echoed through the cave, illuminating the crystals in flashes of blinding light. Gary fought with a ferocity born of desperation, using his knowledge of explosives to create diversions and traps. Astra, despite her injured arm, fought with the skill and courage of a warrior princess. Gary detonated the charges near the entrance, triggering a deafening explosion that sent rocks tumbling down, sealing off the main passage. "That bought us some time," Gary yelled, coughing in the dust-filled air. "But it also sealed our escape," Astra said grimly, pointing to the collapsed entrance. A plasma blast struck the ground near Astra, sending her sprawling. She cried out in pain, clutching her injured arm. "Astra!" Gary rushed to her side, shielding her with his body. "Are you all right?" "Go," she gasped, her face pale. "Save yourself, the message. It is sent." "Not a chance," Gary said, scooping her up in his arms. "We're in this together." He began to run deeper into the cave system, his breath ragged. They reached a dead end, a narrow passage that terminated in a solid wall of rock. They were trapped. The Draconis soldiers were closing in, their footsteps echoing through the cave, but the message had been sent. The groaning of stressed plasteel and tortured rock echoed around them. Astra coughed, a fine gray dust coating her scales. "Is it stable?" she asked, her voice tight with pain. Gary ran a hand over a fractured support beam, the metal cold and vibrating faintly. "Relatively," he said, his voice grim. "Another tremor like the last one and this whole section could come down. We need to move, and quickly. This way." He pointed to a section where the ceiling hadn't completely collapsed, though jagged rocks jutted down like teeth. "Based on the stress fractures, the weight distribution is marginally better along that path, marginally being the operative word." He offered her a hand. Each step sent tremors through the debris. Gary kept a supporting arm around Astra, her weight heavy against him. Her scales felt rough and hot beneath his hand, a stark contrast to the frigid air. Above them, the rhythmic thud of digging echoed through the ruined tunnel. "They're getting closer," Astra gasped. Suddenly, Gary stopped, his hand resting on a massive rock face that had sheared off from the ceiling. "Wait," he said, squinting in the dim light. "There's something here." He ran his hand along the rough surface, feeling for irregularities. A seam. A fault line, maybe. With a grunt, he heaved against the rock. It didn't budge. Astra, gritting her teeth against the pain, reached out and placed her hand on the rock next to his. "There," she said, her voice strained. "There is a cavity behind it. I can feel the air circulating." Gary nodded, pulling out his multi-tool. "Let's see what's hiding back here." He wedged the tool into the seam and began to pry. With a screech of protesting stone, the rock face shifted, revealing a narrow, dark passage. It was a natural tunnel carved out by ancient lava flows, barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. "This wasn't on the schematics," Gary muttered, shining his light into the passage. The air was stale and thin, carrying the faint scent of sulfur. Astra swayed, her reptilian eyes unfocused for a moment. A low hiss escaped her lips. "The ancients," she whispered, her voice raspy. I see them mining this passage. It connects." She blinked, shaking her head. It was part of an old Draconis mining operation, abandoned centuries ago. The tunnel was a tight squeeze. Gary went first, crawling on his hands and knees, the rough rock scraping against his suit. Astra followed, her larger frame making the passage even more difficult. He could hear her labored breathing behind him, punctuated by stifled groans of pain. Up ahead, the tunnel narrowed even further. Gary reached a section where he had to crawl on his belly, pushing his equipment ahead of him. He shined his light back at Astra. "Almost there," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. "Just a bit further." He reached another obstruction, a sealed section of the tunnel, blocked by a collapsed rockfall reinforced with ancient Draconis plasteel. The metal was corroded and crumbling, but still stubbornly in place. "Damn it," Gary muttered, pulling out his multi-tool again. He set the tool to its cutting function and began to work on the plasteel, sparks flying in the confined space. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. Finally, with a groan of tearing metal, the section gave way, revealing a small, dusty chamber. Inside, covered in a thick layer of grime, was a mining cart. It was ancient, its wheels rusted and its frame warped, but it was still intact. "Well, I'll be damned," Gary said, a flicker of hope in his voice. "Looks like our luck just changed." He examined the cart, testing its weight capacity. "It's not pretty, but I think we can make this work." Working quickly, Gary used his multi-tool and some salvaged materials to reinforce the cart's frame and attach a makeshift harness. It wasn't comfortable, but it would allow him to pull Astra along, saving her strength and speeding their escape. Above them, the digging grew louder, more frantic. They were running out of time. "Let's go," Gary said, helping Astra into the cart. "Hold on tight." As Gary pulled the cart through the narrow tunnel, the Draconis Soldian broke through the cave in. Sergeant Varro, a hulking brute with a scarred face and eyes as cold as the lunar surface, surveyed the scene. "They went that way," one of the soldiers said, pointing to the hidden passage. Varro snarled, his reptilian teeth bared. "After them. Zarthus wants the princess alive, but the human." "Kill him." Gary and Astra emerged from the tunnel into a larger cavern, the mining cart rattling over the uneven floor. He glanced back. "They're through, we need to move." He saw a pile of discarded mining equipment, broken drills, empty fuel canisters, and piles of loose rock. An idea sparked in his mind. He stopped, quickly gathering the materials. "What are you doing?" Astra asked, her voice weak. "Creating a distraction," Gary said, setting the fuel canisters and loose rocks in a pile. He rigged a detonator using his multi-tool and a salvaged power cell. "A little bit of human ingenuity." "That won't stop them for long," Astra said. "Long enough," Gary replied, setting the timer. "Long enough to get us to the exit." He grabbed the cart and began to run, the small explosion erupting behind them, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the tunnel. The explosion bought them some time, but the soldiers were relentless. Gary pulled Astra through the cavern, the mining cart bouncing and swaying precariously. He spotted an old mining shaft, a dark hole leading upwards towards the surface. "Almost there," he gasped, his lungs burning. "Just a little further." They emerged onto the lunar surface, the harsh sunlight blinding after the darkness of the cave. The landscape was desolate and unforgiving, a sea of gray dust and jagged rocks. The thin atmosphere offered little protection from the radiation and the extreme temperatures. Astra shivered, her scales turning a dull, lifeless gray. "We're exposed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We won't last long out here." Meanwhile, aboard a neutral trading vessel, the Stardust Drifter, Captain Alara Vorn, a grizzled veteran with a conscience as big as her ship, stared at the emergency beacon flashing on her console. "Draconis Royal Crest," her first mate said, his voice hesitant. "We're under strict orders to avoid any involvement in the Draconis Civil War." Alara clenched her jaw. "Orders be damned," she said, her eyes hardening. "That's a distress signal, and I don't leave anyone to die out here." She barked into the comm, set a course for the coordinates, full speed ahead. Back on the lunar surface, the Draconis soldiers emerged from the mining shaft in their armored transport vehicle. They spotted Gary and Astra, their vehicle kicking up a cloud of dust as they accelerated towards them. "We're out of time," Gary said, his voice grim. He scanned the desolate landscape, searching for any sign of cover. He spotted a narrow crevice in a nearby rock formation. "There." "Let's go." He pulled Astra towards the crevice, the transport vehicle closing in rapidly. They squeezed into the narrow space, the rock pressing against their bodies. Gary drew his sidearm, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is it, isn't it?" Astra said, her voice resigned. "Not if I can help it," Gary replied, his eyes fixed on the approaching transport. Just as the transport reached them, a shadow fell over the lunar surface. A ship decloaked above them, its weapons systems charged and glowing. "Draconis transport," a voice boomed over the comm system, the voice alien but the language clear. "This is Captain Alara Vorn of the Stardust Drifter. Stand down immediately and release the prisoners." The Draconis soldiers ignored the warning. With a roar of engines, they opened fire on Gary and Astra, energy bolts slamming into the rock around them. "Damn them!" Alara roared. "Open fire, all batteries." The Stardust Drifter's weapons unleashed a barrage of energy, striking the transport vehicle with pinpoint accuracy. The transport exploded in a ball of fire and twisted metal, sending shockwaves across the lunar surface. The fate of the Draconis soldiers remained ambiguous. The rescue ship was on its way. The comm crackled to life, an alien voice cutting through the silence. "Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Vorlak of the Alsaid Collective Ship Wanderer. We detected your distress beacon. Stand down and prepare to be boarded for questioning." Gary glanced at Astra, her face pale despite the violet scales. "He disabled our transport. We don't have much choice." He keyed the comm. "Captain Vorlak, this is Gary Williams. We request safe passage and assistance. We're unarmed and have sustained heavy damage." He added, hoping the universal translator caught the nuance, "We are traders seeking fair exchange." "We will determine that," Vorlak's voice replied, devoid of warmth. "Lower your boarding ramp." Gary sighed. Let's hope his fair exchange isn't a holding cell. He helped Astra to her feet, wincing as she leaned heavily on him. The boarding ramp of the Wanderer extended, revealing two Alsaid guards. The Alsaid were tall and slender, with smooth, gray skin and large black eyes that seemed to absorb all light. They carried energy rifles with an easy competence. They gestured for Gary and Astra to proceed. Astra stumbled, and one of the guards moved to assist, his touch surprisingly gentle. They were led through sterile corridors to the bridge. Captain Vorlak stood at the helm, a figure of quiet authority. He was a classic Alsaid, but with a weariness etched into his face that spoke of countless deals and compromises. "Welcome aboard the Wanderer," he said, his voice surprisingly melodic. "I am Captain Vorlak. I intercepted your distress beacon and, recognizing the Draconis Royal Crest on your vessel, felt obligated to intervene. Explain yourselves." Gary stepped forward. "Captain, I am a licensed trader. This is Astra, a political refugee. She is being unjustly persecuted on Draconis. I request asylum for her under Galactic Trade Law Article 312, Section B, which protects individuals fleeing politically motivated violence. Vorlak raised a skeptical eyebrow. Political persecution. From what I understand, the Draconis are currently embroiled in a civil war. Hardly a situation for outside interference. And you, human, what is your interest in this matter? Astra straightened despite the pain etched on her face. Captain Vorlak, I am Astra of the Draconis royal line. Zarthus is a usurper, a tyrant who seized the throne through treachery. He hunts me to extinguish any claim to the throne. I can prove my lineage. She reached into a pouch at her waist and produced a small, intricately carved object, a mind pearl. Placing it against her temple, her eyes glazed over, and she began to speak in a voice not entirely her own, reciting ancient Draconis laws and royal decrees. The room seemed to hum with a faint energy. Vorlak watched, his expression shifting from skepticism to something akin to awe. The Alsaid guards shifted uneasily. Astra swayed and Gary steadied her. The recitation ended and Astra gasped, her hand flying to her head. The mind pearl allows me to access the memories of my ancestors. It is taxing. Vorlak steepled his fingers. Impressive, but even if I accept your claim, Princess, harboring you is a dangerous proposition. Zarthus is ruthless. He will not take this lightly. He paused. Furthermore, I must warn you that Zarthus has powerful allies within the Human Trade Federation. Officially, they support his regime. Your situation is even more precarious than you realize. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Captain, an Alsaid officer shouted from a console. We have multiple Draconis warships approaching. They are hailing us, demanding we surrender the fugitive. Vorlak swore in a language Gary didn't recognize. They found us quickly. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Ready the hyperdrive. Captain, the hyperdrive is damaged, the officer reported, his voice tight with panic. The firefight with the transport damaged a critical component. Gary stepped forward, his mind racing. He had salvaged some tech from the destroyed transport. What's the nature of the damage? I might be able to help. Vorlak looked at him, a flicker of hope in his black eyes. The primary flux capacitor is cracked. We can't generate enough power for a jump. Gary accessed the ship's diagnostics through his suit. I have some salvaged components that might work as a temporary bypass. It'll be risky, but it's our only chance. Astra, despite her pain, spoke with authority. I can assist. The Mind Pearl. It contains schematics of Draconis engineering. I know how to reroute the energy flow. Together, Gary and Astra raced to the engine room, Vorlak barking orders to his crew. The engine room was a cacophony of sparking wires and hissing coolant. Gary worked feverishly, connecting the salvaged components with practiced ease. Astra, her brow furrowed in concentration, directed him, her voice weak but firm. Connect the conduit to the auxiliary power grid, she instructed. Bypass the damaged capacitor, but be careful. The energy flow will be unstable. Sparks flew as Gary made the final connection. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, bathing the room in an eerie blue light. We're ready, Captain. Gary shouted over the din. Just as the Draconis warships came into visual range, the Wanderer shuddered and lurched forward, jumping to hyperspace. The stars stretched into streaks of light as they escaped the system. As the ship stabilized, Gary leaned against a bulkhead, exhausted. Astra swayed and he caught her, pulling her close. For a moment they simply held each other, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a growing awareness of their shared danger and their deepening connection. Thank you, Gary, she whispered, her voice barely audible, for everything. He brushed a strand of violet hair from her face. We're not out of the woods yet, Astra. On the bridge, Vorlak received a coded message. His face darkened. We have a problem. A message from the Human Trade Federation. They are officially backing Zarthus and demanding Astra's extradition. The Wanderer plunged into the asteroid field, a chaotic ballet of space rocks swirling around them. Red alerts blared as Zarthus's warships, hulking predators of metal and plasma, gave chase. "They're gaining on us," Vorlak's voice crackled over the comms. Gary, his hands a blur on the controls, weaved the Wanderer through the asteroid field with impossible grace. Years of navigating treacherous trade routes had honed his spatial awareness to a razor's edge. "Hold tight, we're going to dance." Astra, her brow furrowed in concentration, accessed the Mind Pearl. The device hummed against her temple, drawing on the collective knowledge of her ancestors. There, an ancient Draconis mining tunnel. It's uncharted, but it leads deeper into the field. Vorlak hesitated. A tunnel? That could be a trap. "Trust me, Vorlak," Astra said, her voice firm. "It's our best chance." The Mind Pearl pulsed with images, half-formed memories of a time when her people had sought to harness the asteroid field's mineral wealth. She could also sense the presence of mind-altering crystals deep within the tunnel, a potentially dangerous side effect. Gary didn't wait for further discussion. He swung the Wanderer towards the indicated coordinates, the ship groaning under the strain. "Here we go." The Wanderer plunged into the darkness of the tunnel, the asteroid rock closing in around them. But Zarthus's warships were relentless. They followed, their massive forms dwarfing the tunnel's narrow confines. The battle transformed into a claustrophobic nightmare, sensors scrambled by the tunnel walls and the strange energies emanating from the crystalline deposits. "Shields are failing," Vorlak reported, his voice tight with anxiety. "Rerouting power from life support to weapons," Gary said, his focus absolute. "Astra, can you do anything about their sensors?" Astra, her eyes glowing with an inner light, channeled the power of the Mind Pearl. She transmitted a stream of misleading sensor data, painting false images on Zarthus's bridge. "They're seeing ghosts," she said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "Let's see how they handle a few phantom asteroids." The Draconis warships, caught in the web of illusion, slammed into the tunnel walls, their hulls groaning and sparking. One, its navigation systems completely scrambled, careened wildly, narrowly missing the Wanderer. "Now!" Gary yelled, seizing the opportunity. He unleashed a volley of plasma blasts, crippling another warship. With a final burst of speed, the Wanderer emerged from the tunnel, bursting into the breathtaking expanse of a hidden nebula. Swirls of iridescent gas and stardust painted the void, concealing them from Zarthus's pursuing fleet. "We've lost them," Vorlak breathed, relief washing over him. Astra, still connected to the Mind Pearl, reached out to her loyalist forces on Draconis. "People of Draconis," she said, her voice amplified across the comms network. "I am Astra, your rightful heir. Zarthus has betrayed you. He has profited from selling our own people into slavery." She transmitted the evidence Gary had gathered, the irrefutable proof of Zarthus's crimes. "Rise up. Reclaim your freedom." The response was immediate. Across Draconis, loyalist forces, bolstered by Astra's words and Gary's evidence, launched a coordinated rebellion. Key cities and military installations fell to their control. Zarthus's forces, demoralized by the rebellion and the revelation of his treachery, began to desert in droves. The end came swiftly. Zarthus's remaining forces, leaderless and without support, were crushed by the loyalist rebellion. Days later, Astra returned to Draconis, greeted by cheering crowds. The coronation was a spectacle of Draconis tradition and newfound hope. As the crown was placed upon her head, Astra knew her reign would be different. "I promise you justice," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "I promise you prosperity, and I promise you trade with the Alsaid who have proven their loyalty." Then she turned to Gary, who stood at the edge of the dais. Taking his hand, she raised it for all to see. "And I present to you, Gary Williams, my consort, my partner, and the symbol of our unity." A gasp rippled through the crowd. A human consort, it was unheard of. But as they looked at Astra's radiant face and Gary's unwavering gaze, they saw not a violation of tradition, but a promise of a new future. "Together," Astra continued, We will launch a joint initiative to combat slavery and corruption throughout the galaxy. We will use human ingenuity and draconis resources to create a better future for all. In the heart of the capital city, a statue was erected, a human and a draconis standing side by side, their hands clasped in unity. Gary accepted a post as cultural liaison, bridging the gap between their two worlds. Standing on a balcony overlooking the city, Astra turned to Gary, her eyes filled with love. "We did it," she said. Gary smiled, taking her hand. "We did." They looked out at the city at the dawn of a new era, their commitment to each other and to the future of both their species unwavering. The galaxy was vast, and the challenges ahead were great, but together they were ready.